Hey friends, around 70% of viewers who watch my videos haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. It would truly mean a lot to me. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps the videos reach more people and really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much. Let me know in the comments which city or country are you watching from. I arrived at the campsite late in the afternoon after a long hike up a narrow, steep trail. The air was cool but still the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the woods are holding their breath. I chose a small clearing near the top of a hill, surrounded by tall pine trees. The ground was soft with layers of pine needles and dry leaves. I set up my tent carefully, making sure the corners were tight and the stakes held firm in the soil. The sun was starting to sink behind the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The light dimmed quickly in these woods. As I finished arranging my small campfire, I noticed the silence felt different here. Not just the usual forest calm, but a stillness that pressed down on me. No birds were singing. No insects buzzed. The usual background noises were missing. I sat close to the fire, watching the flames flicker, feeling the warmth against the chill that was creeping into the air. The smell of damp earth mixed with pine filled my nose. Everything was sharp and clear, every crack of a twig or rustle of a leaf breaking the silence like a sudden shout. I lay back on my sleeping pad inside the tent when the dark fully settled. Outside, the stars were just faint pinpricks, barely visible through the thick canopy. I heard the occasional pop from the firewood, but then something else began. From somewhere uphill, I caught the sound of trees shaking. At first, it was soft, like a light breeze brushing through branches. But I knew there was no wind tonight. The air was perfectly still. The shaking grew louder, more deliberate. Branches scraped against each other with a dry, scraping noise. The sound was steady, moving closer, coming down the hill toward me. My heart started to pick up, slow and steady. Not a panic, but an alertness that sharpened every sense. The trees near the edge of the clearing swayed slightly, though the rest of the forest remained still. I stared out through the tent's mesh window, straining to see what was causing the noise. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, so I could only make out dark shapes shifting between the trees. The shaking moved in slow, rhythmic bursts, like something large brushing against the trunks and branches. I thought about what could make that kind of noise without wind. Animals were the first thing that came to mind, but nothing I knew of moved through trees like that without breaking twigs or making louder sounds. Bears sometimes broke branches when they walked, but they usually grunted or made some other noise, not this quiet but forceful shaking. The woods felt too empty to hold an animal large enough to cause it without me hearing more. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it must be a deer or maybe a group of them moving through the brush. But the sound was too heavy and slow for deer. The noise came closer, like it was walking down the hill toward my camp. I stayed still, not wanting to attract attention. My breathing was quiet but steady. The shaking stopped at the edge of the clearing. I waited, frozen, watching the dark line of trees just beyond the firelight. The silence returned for a moment, thick and deep. Then the trees began shaking again, this time on the side closer to me. It was as if something was pushing through the branches, trying to get closer. I reached slowly for my flashlight and turned it on, shining the beam into the forest. The light cut through the darkness in a narrow cone, illuminating dry leaves, broken branches, and patches of moss. I swept the light across the trees, looking for movement. Nothing appeared. No eyes reflecting the beam back, no shapes emerging from the shadows. Just empty woods. I tried to reason it out. Maybe the wind had picked up for a second in a small patch, shaking the branches. But the air was still against my skin. Maybe an animal had slipped down the hill and was hiding just out of sight. Or maybe the sound was from an old tree about to fall. The ground around me was uneven, and dead trees were scattered uphill. But I had no way to check in the dark. I shut off the flashlight and listened again. The shaking started again, this time further away, moving back uphill. The sound became softer, slower, until it faded into the night. The silence returned, but the feeling stayed with me. The woods seemed different now, like they were watching me, waiting. I kept the fire going longer than usual. Feeding it with dry wood so the flames would be bright and warm. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and stayed awake for hours, eyes wide, ears open. I thought about hiking back down before dawn, but the trail was steep and dark, and I was tired. I knew I would have to leave early. I finally fell into a restless sleep as the fire died out, the cold pressing in. At first light, I packed everything quickly, my hands stiff from the cold. The forest looked peaceful in daylight, normal even. I hiked down the trail, eyes scanning the trees for any sign of what had shaken the branches. I saw no footprints or disturbed ground, no broken branches or nests. The hillside looked untouched. Later, I learned that animals like bears or large deer usually leave clear tracks. A falling tree would be obvious. What I heard was different. Something heavy moving through the trees, close but unseen, without a sound except the shaking branches. Something that moved slow and careful. I have no explanation. I do not believe in ghosts or stories. What I experienced was real, something physical in the woods. I do not plan to camp alone on that hill again. The memory of those shaking trees, moving closer with no wind or sound, stays with me. It was the kind of quiet that hides something watching, waiting, just beyond sight. The kind of silence you never forget. We had planned the trip for months. It was a chance to get away from everything. Work, phones, noise, and spend time together in the woods. My wife, our 2 kids, and our dog, a big mutt named Bear. We chose a small, remote campground in a national forest several hours from the city. The kind of place where cell signal disappears and the trees grow thick and close. We arrived late in the afternoon, carrying the gear down the narrow dirt trail to our site. The ground was soft from recent rain, and the smell of pine and damp earth filled the air. We set up the tent near the edge of a clearing, close enough to the trail for easy access but far enough that it felt private. Bear had been restless all day but finally settled once we were inside the tent. He usually loved camping, but this time something felt off. After dinner, I went to gather firewood from nearby dead branches while the kids explored with my wife. Bear followed me for a bit but kept looking back toward the tent. Then he stopped, ears perked, and refused to move further. I tried to call him, but he sat down firmly, eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the clearing. The sky was fading fast, and I thought maybe he was just tired or sensing the dark coming. But there was a tension in him that I had not seen before. Night came quickly. The fire crackled and popped, casting warm light over our small camp. Bear stayed close to the tent, his eyes scanning the trees. I watched the woods, listening to the usual sounds. Crickets, distant owls, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But every now and then, I caught a faint, dragging noise from the trail. It was soft at first, almost like something being pulled over dirt and leaves. I thought it might be a fallen branch shifting or an animal moving logs for shelter. I kept my attention on it, but it never came close. We all turned in early. The kids were tired from the hike, and the fire was nearly out. I zipped up the tent and settled in beside my family. Bear lay just inside the entrance, stiff and alert. I tried to ignore the dragging sound, but it came again, louder this time. It was slow and heavy, like a log being pulled across the dirt. The noise moved along the trail in fits and starts, stopping and starting, as if whoever or whatever was making it was cautious or unsure. Morning came and brought light and warmth. I stepped out of the tent first, still half asleep. Bear did not move. I noticed his hair was raised along his back and his eyes were locked on the trail. I followed his gaze and saw something that sent a cold rush through me. Across the narrow dirt path, thick logs had been dragged and piled in a way that blocked any easy passage. The logs were fresh, leaves and dirt still stuck to the bark, and the marks in the ground showed they had been moved during the night. We were trapped, not by anything supernatural or imagined, just logs dragged across the trail, blocking the only way out. The forest felt different under the morning sun. The silence was heavier, My mind raced to explain what had happened. No other campers were around. The nearest ranger station was miles away. How could something large enough to move those logs be here without us hearing it clearly or seeing it? Bear refused to leave the tent all night. He must have sensed whatever it was that dragged those logs. The idea that a person or animal strong enough to do this had been near us in the dark filled me with unease. I scanned the trail for footprints or other signs, but there was nothing clear. The ground was soft, but no shoe prints or tire tracks. Just the dragged logs and disturbed leaves. I checked my phone out of habit, even though I knew there was no signal. No bars. No way to call for help. The quiet made the weight of our isolation sink in. The woods had swallowed us whole. We tried to lift and move the logs. They were heavy and awkward, some nearly as thick as my arm. The trail was too narrow, the ground uneven, and the logs slippery from moisture. Took a long time, but we managed to shift some of them enough to squeeze through. Bear did not budge from the tent. Once clear, we packed up quickly, our earlier excitement replaced by a careful, tense focus. The trip was over. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like something watched us from the shadows of the trees. Later, on the drive back, I thought about the night and what had happened. Nothing supernatural, no ghost stories, just something or someone moving logs in the dark to trap us. Maybe a hunter or someone hiding in the forest, wanting to keep people out or trap them. The idea felt too real to ignore. Bear stayed quiet for days after, not eager to go back outside. He trusted me, but he had seen or sensed something I had not. I learned that night the woods hold secrets that are not always explained by nature. Some things are better left unknown, and some instincts are there for a reason. We never went back to that spot. The forest stayed silent, but I could still hear the sound of those dragged logs every time I closed my eyes. When I was a kid, my family took a trip deep into the woods. It was the kind of place where the trees grew so thick the sunlight barely touched the ground. We pitched our tents near a small clearing with a fire pit built from stones. The air smelled sharp and clean, a mix of pine and damp earth. My parents said it was a perfect spot for camping. I remember falling asleep to the sounds of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. That night, I woke up suddenly. The sky was dark, but the moonlight filtered faintly through the branches. I blinked a few times to clear my vision and realized I was no longer in my sleeping bag but sitting up on the cold ground. I didn't know why I had woken. The camp was silent except for the crackling fire, still burning low in the pit. Its flickering light cast long shadows that danced across the trees and the tents. Something caught my eye near the fire pit. I froze. There was a figure crouched low, very close to the flames. It moved slowly and carefully, using its hands in a way I had never seen before. It seemed to be picking at something or shaping the ground. I could not make out any clear features because the fire's light did not reach the person's face. Their body was bent forward, shoulders hunched, as if they were working on a delicate task. I did not scream. I did not move. I was too small and too scared to even breathe loudly. My heart was pounding hard but strangely calm at the same time, like my body was stuck in place. I watched the figure's hands. They were thin and pale in the firelight. The fingers moved with a strange precision, like using tools. But there was no tool in their hands, just their fingers. I thought maybe they were trying to start a new fire or arrange the stones, but it did not look natural. The figure stayed crouched for a long time. I counted the seconds in my head but lost track. I could hear the fire crackling, the soft night sounds of insects, and the rustle of the trees. The figure was still focused on its task, never looking around, never noticing me watching from the shadows. It was almost like it was performing a silent ritual, but not in a magical way. More like a habit formed by someone who spent a lot of time alone in the woods. I wanted to call out, to ask who it was, but no sound came from my mouth. Fear held me tight. I thought about running back to my parents' tent, but was afraid the figure might notice and follow me. I had no idea what it wanted or why it was there. The longer I looked, the more I felt the figure was not threatening but something deeply sad and lost. Suddenly, the figure stopped moving. It straightened up slowly, standing in the firelight. I saw the face then. It was a man, not very old, with messy hair and dirt smudges on his face and clothes. His eyes were tired and dark, staring at the fire with no emotion. He looked weak and small, like someone who had been wandering in the forest for days. His hands were stained with dirt and something sticky I could not identify. The man turned his head slightly as if sensing something, but he did not look at me. He took a deep breath and walked away from the fire pit into the dark woods without a sound. I watched him disappear among the trees, swallowed by the night. The next morning, my parents found me sitting by the fire pit. I was pale and silent. I told them nothing about the figure. I was not sure if I had imagined it, but the marks on the ground around the fire pit told a different story. There were small holes dug into the dirt and pieces of broken branches arranged in strange patterns. It looked like someone had tried to build something or leave a message, but it was unfinished. We packed up and left that day. On the way out of the forest, I looked back once and saw a small clearing where the man had vanished. The trees stood still, quiet and watching. I never saw him again, but the image of that night stayed with me. It was a night of silence and strange loneliness, a reminder that sometimes people get lost in places where no one looks for them. Years later, I learned about hikers who disappeared in the woods nearby, some found after days, others never. I think the man I saw was one of them, someone who had given up and waited silently by a fire that was never meant to keep him warm. The fire pit was not just a place to cook or keep warm. It was a fragile spot where lost souls tried to hold on to something, using their hands like tools, shaping the earth to make sense of their pain. That night taught me fear, but not the kind that comes from monsters. It was the fear of seeing how quiet and small a person can become when swallowed by the dark. The fire was still burning, the woods still watching, but the man was gone. I was left alone with the memory, wide awake in the silence. I had planned this trip for months, wanting a break from the city noise and the constant pressure of work. The desert seemed the perfect place to find silence and space. I drove for hours, leaving the highways behind, until only dry dirt and scrub filled the view. I picked a spot near a cluster of low rocks that gave a little shelter from the wind. The sun was dropping low when I set up camp, the sky turning from blue to orange, then deep purple. I built a small fire, careful to keep it controlled and neat. The night air was already cooling, crisp against my skin, and the quiet around me was almost complete except for the crackle of the flames. The desert had a way of feeling endless, stretching out flat and empty, but at the same time it was full of subtle life. I watched the small flickers of light from insects near the fire and the slow crawl of a lizard across a nearby rock. As darkness settled in, the stars took over the sky, sharp and bright in the dry air. The fire threw long shadows that danced over the ground and the rocks around me. It was peaceful, exactly what I had come for. After eating some food I had packed, I sat back on my sleeping pad, feeling the warmth of the fire against the cold desert night. The silence was deeper now, as if the world was holding its breath. There were no cars, no planes, not even the faint hum of distant cities. Just the occasional rustle of wind moving through dry brush. It was a kind of quiet that felt alive. Then I noticed something strange. Just beyond the edge of the firelight, where the darkness pressed in, I saw movement. It was slow and careful, like something was stepping lightly, but the shape was not clear. The fire flickered and I could not tell what it was. I looked closer. It was walking parallel to the camp, moving along the perimeter in the shadows just outside the circle of light. What made me freeze was that it did not cast a shadow at all. I stared at the spot where I was sure a shadow should appear, but there was nothing. The fire was steady and bright, and yet the figure moved without breaking the pattern of light and dark on the ground. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of my eyes or maybe a shape formed by windblown dust. The desert can play tricks like that. But the shape was definite, tall and thin, moving with purpose and slow caution. It did not hurry or run. It moved just beyond where the fire reached. My heart started beating harder. The idea that something could walk in firelight without casting a shadow seemed impossible. But there it was. I stayed still, watching, every nerve alert. The fire crackled softly. The figure moved around the camp like it was inspecting, its pace steady, careful to avoid the firelight. It never came closer, never crossed into the circle of flames. I reached for my flashlight, ready to shine it at the figure. The beam would show what it was or make it run away. But before I could turn it on, the figure stopped moving. It was as if it sensed my attention. For a long moment, it just stood still. Then, slowly, it began to move away, heading toward the far edge of the rocks and finally disappearing into the blackness beyond. I stayed awake the rest of the night, fire burning low but steady. I scanned the dark edges around the camp, eyes sharp for any more signs. Nothing else appeared. The desert remained quiet, silent in a way that pressed on my chest. The firelight threw shadows that no longer seemed friendly. At dawn, I packed up without breaking my gaze on the dark horizon. The sky was pale pink, the chill easing from the night air. The sun rose, and with it the harsh desert light revealed the ground around my camp. There were no footprints, no marks of any kind near the fire or beyond the rocks. Nothing to explain the figure I had seen. Later, driving back along the dirt roads, I thought about what I had experienced. The desert is full of animals and people moving quietly, but nothing there could walk in firelight without casting a shadow. It was impossible. I kept asking myself what it could have been, replaying the image in my mind. After days of thinking, the most likely explanation was that it was a person moving in the shadows, careful to stay just out of the fire's reach. The angle of the firelight, the rough ground, and the way the darkness and light blended could make it look like there was no shadow. Someone else in the desert that night, watching me or just passing through. It made sense. No magic, no ghosts. Just a stranger or maybe someone who lived nearby and knew the land well. That thought was more unsettling than any strange shadow. Knowing that out there, in the emptiness, there could be someone close enough to watch without being seen. That kind of silence, the kind that hides something watching, stayed with me long after I left the desert behind. I arrived at the trailhead late in the afternoon. The forest was quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze and the occasional call of a distant bird. I had planned this solo trip for weeks, wanting to get away from the noise of the city and spend a night alone in the woods. The air was cool and smelled like pine and earth. I parked my car on the gravel lot near the entrance and checked my pack to make sure I had everything. The sky was clear, and I figured I had plenty of daylight left to reach the clearing where I planned to camp. The trail looked inviting, worn but well-maintained, with bright orange markers nailed to the trees guiding the way. I stepped onto the path, feeling the crunch of dirt and small stones under my boots. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Birds flitted from branch to branch, and the forest seemed alive but calm. The markers were easy to follow at first. I moved steadily, breathing in the fresh air and listening to the natural sounds around me. After about an hour, I noticed that the trail began to narrow, the trees growing closer together. The markers still showed the way, but something felt off. I paused to catch my breath and looked around. The forest seemed darker here, the canopy thicker, the light dimmer. I pressed on, trusting the markers. After another 30 minutes, I reached a fork in the trail. The markers pointed sharply to the right, deeper into the forest. I took the turn, but something about the way the markers were arranged made me uneasy. They did not follow the natural flow of the path. Instead, they seemed almost deliberate in pushing me farther inside where the trees grew densely and the underbrush thickened. I stopped and looked carefully at the markers. They were fresh, the paint still vibrant. But the arrangement made no sense compared to the map I had studied earlier. The main trail was supposed to curve left here, not go right. I felt a flicker of doubt. I looked around for any other signs, like blazes carved into the bark or old markers I might have missed. There was nothing but these bright orange signs, directing me straight into the thick woods. I thought about turning back to my car, but the sun was already low, and I was too far in to make it back easily before dark. So I decided to trust the markers, hoping they led to a hidden route I did not know about. The deeper I went, the more silent the forest became. The birds stopped singing, and the wind seemed to die down. The thick canopy blocked out most of the remaining light. I pulled out my flashlight, even though it was only early evening. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing twisted branches and thick undergrowth. The trail underfoot was no longer smooth. It was uneven and covered in fallen leaves and sticks. I stepped carefully, feeling the weight of the forest around me. After about an hour, I realized I had not seen any other trail markers for a long time. The path grew faint, almost invisible in some places. I stopped to check my map and compass, but the unfamiliar route made it hard to match the terrain. The trees all looked the same. My unease grew. I decided to turn around and head back the way I came. I retraced my steps, but soon I noticed the trail markers again. They were no longer pointing back toward the main trail. Instead, they had been rearranged, now pointing farther into the forest, away from the direction I knew. I stopped cold, looking at the signs in disbelief. It was impossible. When had someone come here to change the markers? The forest was remote, and the trail was not heavily traveled. I had seen no footprints or other signs of recent visitors. Yet the markers were clear. Someone had moved them deliberately to mislead anyone on this path. The thought chilled me. I quickened my pace, trying to find the way back to the car. But the forest around me seemed to close in. The trees pressed closer, and the shadows deepened. I felt watched, though I could see nothing. My flashlight flickered once, and I checked the batteries. They were fine. I pressed on, following what I hoped was the right direction. My heart pounded. My breath came faster. The forest noise was gone entirely now. No birds, no wind, no animals. Just silence. When I finally broke through the trees, I saw the gravel lot in the distance, faintly lit by the fading daylight. Relief flooded me. I ran the last few steps and reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, hands trembling. The engine turned over but refused to start. I tried again and again. Nothing. The battery was fine. I checked the lights, the radio, all dead except for a faint glow from the dashboard. I knew I had left my phone in the car, so no way to call for help. I sat back, trying to calm myself. The night fell quickly. The parking lot grew dark except for the weak beams from distant streetlights. I sat inside, locking the doors and keeping my flashlight close. Every few minutes I tried the ignition, but the engine would not turn over. The cold crept in. I wrapped my jacket tighter around me. I thought about the rearranged trail markers and the strange silence in the forest. Someone had been here, watching, moving things, waiting. But for what? Hours passed. The wind began to pick up, rattling the car windows. The trees in the distance swayed. At some point, fatigue overwhelmed me, and I dozed in fits and starts. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray, I tried the key again. This time, the engine roared to life. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. I wasted no time. I drove away from the forest, not looking back. Later, safe at home, I checked news and forums. No reports of hikers missing or trail tampering in that area. I thought about telling someone but worried they would dismiss it as a mistake or a trick of the mind. But I knew what I had seen. The rearranged markers, the silence, the car that would not start until morning. Someone had been out there, watching and waiting for me. The thought still unsettles me. I have no idea who or why, but I know I was not alone in those woods. I have not gone back since. I will not go back. I arrived at the trailhead late in the afternoon. The forest was quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze and the occasional call of a distant bird. I had planned this solo trip for weeks, wanting to get away from the noise of the city and spend a night alone in the woods. The air was cool and smelled like pine and earth. I parked my car on the gravel lot near the entrance and checked my pack to make sure I had everything. The sky was clear, and I figured I had plenty of daylight left to reach the clearing where I planned to camp. The trail looked inviting, worn but well maintained, with bright orange markers nailed to the trees guiding the way. I stepped onto the path, feeling the crunch of dirt and small stones under my boots. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Birds flitted from branch to branch, and the forest seemed alive but calm. The markers were easy to follow at first. I moved steadily, breathing in the fresh air and listening to the natural sounds around me. After about an hour, I noticed that the trail began to narrow, the trees growing closer together. The markers still showed the way, but something felt off. I paused to catch my breath and looked around. The forest seemed darker here, the canopy thicker, the light dimmer. I pressed on, trusting the markers. After another 30 minutes, I reached a fork in the trail. The markers pointed sharply to the right, deeper into the forest. I took the turn, but something about the way the markers were arranged made me uneasy. They did not follow the natural flow of the path. Instead, they seemed almost deliberate in pushing me farther inside where the trees grew densely and the underbrush thickened. I stopped and looked carefully at the markers. They were fresh, the paint still vibrant. But the arrangement made no sense compared to the map I had studied earlier. The main trail was supposed to curve left here, not go right. I felt a flicker of doubt. I looked around for any other signs, like blazes carved into the bark or old markers I might have missed. There was nothing but these bright orange signs, directing me straight into the thick woods. I thought about turning back to my car, but the sun was already low, and I was too far in to make it back easily before dark. So I decided to trust the markers, hoping they led to a hidden route I did not know about. The deeper I went, the more silent the forest became. The birds stopped singing, and the wind seemed to die down. The thick canopy blocked out most of the remaining light. I pulled out my flashlight, even though it was only early evening. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing twisted branches and thick undergrowth. The trail underfoot was no longer smooth. It was uneven and covered in fallen leaves and sticks. I stepped carefully, feeling the weight of the forest around me. After about an hour, I realized I had not seen any other trail markers for a long time. The path grew faint, almost invisible in some places. I stopped to check my map and compass, but the unfamiliar route made it hard to match the terrain. The trees all looked the same. My unease grew. I decided to turn around and head back the way I came. I retraced my steps, but soon I noticed the trail markers again. They were no longer pointing back toward the main trail. Instead, they had been rearranged, now pointing farther into the forest, away from the direction I knew. I stopped cold, looking at the signs in disbelief. It was impossible. When had someone come here to change the markers? The forest was remote, and the trail was not heavily traveled. I had seen no footprints or other signs of recent visitors. Yet the markers were clear. Someone had moved them deliberately to mislead anyone on this path. The thought chilled me. I quickened my pace, trying to find the way back to the car. But the forest around me seemed to close in. The trees pressed closer, and the shadows deepened. I felt watched, though I could see nothing. My flashlight flickered once, and I checked the batteries. They were fine. I pressed on, following what I hoped was the right direction. My heart pounded. My breath came faster. The forest noise was gone entirely now. No birds, no wind, no animals. Just silence. When I finally broke through the trees, I saw the gravel lot in the distance, faintly lit by the fading daylight. Relief flooded me. I ran the last few steps and reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, hands trembling. The engine turned over but refused to start. I tried again and again. Nothing. The battery was fine. I checked the lights, the radio, all dead except for a faint glow from the dashboard. I knew I had left my phone in the car, so no way to call for help. I sat back, trying to calm myself. The night fell quickly. The parking lot grew dark except for the weak beams from distant streetlights. I sat inside, locking the doors and keeping my flashlight close. Every few minutes I tried the ignition, but the engine would not turn over. The cold crept in. I wrapped my jacket tighter around me. I thought about the rearranged trail markers and the strange silence in the forest. Someone had been here, watching, moving things, waiting. But for what? Hours passed. The wind began to pick up, rattling the car windows. The trees in the distance swayed. At some point, fatigue overwhelmed me, and I dozed in fits and starts. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray, I tried the key again. This time, the engine roared to life. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. I wasted no time. I drove away from the forest, not looking back. Later, safe at home, I checked news and forums. No reports of hikers missing or trail tampering in that area. I thought about telling someone but worried they would dismiss it as a mistake or a trick of the mind. But I knew what I had seen. The rearranged markers, the silence, the car that would not start until morning. Someone had been out there, watching and waiting for me. The thought still unsettles me. I have no idea who or why, but I know I was not alone in those woods. I have not gone back since. I will not go back. After my dad died, I went back to the place where we used to spend weekends. It was a small patch of woods near the old river, a spot that had been ours for years. I thought going there alone might help me feel closer to him. I was wrong. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the trees, the sky turning from blue to a dull gray. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. The woods were quiet, except for the soft rustling of branches in the light wind. I set up my small tent in the clearing where we always camped. The ground was soft but firm, covered in pine needles and a scattering of twigs. I made a small fire, the flames flickering and casting long shadows across the trees. The warmth felt good against the cool air. I thought about my dad while watching the fire die down. The night grew colder. I decided to explore the brush around the campsite with just a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness but did not reach very far. I walked carefully, stepping over roots and loose stones. The woods felt different at night, quieter and heavier. I could hear my breath, slow and steady. Somewhere nearby, an owl hooted once. I kept moving, trying not to think too much. The silence was a weight pressing on my chest. Then I noticed something. Between the thick bushes, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something walking upright. It was not a deer or any animal I recognized. It moved slowly, stepping carefully. Every time I stopped, it stopped too. I froze, my heart pounding loud enough to feel in my ears. I pointed the flashlight at the spot, but the shadows swallowed the light. When I moved again, it moved again. It was watching me, keeping its distance. I did not want to turn back, not yet. I felt a strange pull, like I needed to know what was there. I moved slowly through the brush, trying to keep quiet. The thing followed, always just out of clear sight. At one point, I tripped over a root and almost fell. It froze and disappeared for a moment. When I looked up, it was gone. But then I saw the footprints. They were fresh. The ground was soft from recent rain, perfect for prints. The footprints were larger than mine, with toes spread too wide and pressed too deep into the dirt. I crouched down and looked closely. They did not match any human foot I had ever seen. The toes were longer, wider, like they belonged to something made to walk silently and with great weight. The depth of the print told me that whoever or whatever made them was heavy. I followed the prints. They led through thick bushes and fallen branches deeper into the woods. The further I went, the harder it was to see the path. The moon was hidden behind clouds, leaving only faint starlight. The cold seeped through my jacket, and I could feel sweat on my back from the effort. The prints stopped near a small stream. I saw broken branches and crushed grass. The tracks led on the other side, but I hesitated. Something felt wrong. I could no longer hear the usual night sounds. No frogs, no crickets, nothing but the quiet splash of water. I stayed still and listened. I thought I heard breathing, low and steady, coming from the shadows across the stream. My skin prickled. I did not want to see what made those prints, but curiosity kept pulling me forward. I crossed the stream carefully, stepping on wet stones. The footprints continued on the other side, leading toward an old fallen tree. I followed them slowly, every sense alert. The brush here was thick, full of thorny branches that scratched my arms. I kept looking behind me, but nothing followed. It was like the thing had stopped tracking me once I crossed the water. The prints ended abruptly near the fallen tree. I scanned the area with my flashlight. I saw nothing unusual, no sign of a person or animal. But then I noticed the broken bark on the tree, the deep scratches running along the trunk. The marks were fresh, and they looked like claws or sharp nails. My heart tightened. I stayed there for a moment, breathing hard, feeling the weight of the night around me. The woods had gone completely silent. It was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes your skin crawl. I knew then that I could not stay. The idea of whatever left those prints being close filled me with a deep unease. I made my way back to camp, moving faster but carefully. The branches scratched my face and arms, and my flashlight flickered once or twice. I kept checking behind me but saw nothing. When I finally reached the clearing, the fire was almost out. I added some wood and sat close to the small flame, watching the dark woods beyond the light. Sleep did not come easily. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept thinking about the footprints and the strange presence moving through the brush. I understood then that my dad's old woods held secrets I never wanted to know. He had loved this place, but now it felt different, almost hostile. In the morning, the light made the woods look gentle again. I packed my things quietly and took one last walk around the clearing. I found the footprints again near the edge of the trees, half faded but still clear. I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill my lungs. I knew I would not come back here at night. Some things in the dark are better left alone. I left that place behind and never told anyone what I saw. The woods were no longer just a place for memories. They had become a warning, and I carried that warning with me, knowing some parts of the world are quiet for a reason. We had planned the trip for months. It was a chance to get away from everything. Work, phones, noise, and spend time together in the woods. My wife, our 2 kids, and our dog, a big mutt named Bear. We chose a small, remote campground in a national forest several hours from the city. The kind of place where cell signal disappears and the trees grow thick and close. We arrived late in the afternoon, carrying the gear down the narrow dirt trail to our site. The ground was soft from recent rain, and the smell of pine and damp earth filled the air. We set up the tent near the edge of a clearing, close enough to the trail for easy access but far enough that it felt private. Bear had been restless all day but finally settled once we were inside the tent. He usually loved camping, but this time something felt off. After dinner, I went to gather firewood from nearby dead branches while the kids explored with my wife. Bear followed me for a bit but kept looking back toward the tent. Then he stopped, ears perked, and refused to move further. I tried to call him, but he sat down firmly, eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the clearing. The sky was fading fast, and I thought maybe he was just tired or sensing the dark coming. But there was a tension in him that I had not seen before. Night came quickly. The fire crackled and popped, casting warm light over our small camp. Bear stayed close to the tent, his eyes scanning the trees. I watched the woods, listening to the usual sounds. Crickets, distant owls, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But every now and then, I caught a faint, dragging noise from the trail. It was soft at first, almost like something being pulled over dirt and leaves. I thought it might be a fallen branch shifting or an animal moving logs for shelter. I kept my attention on it, but it never came close. We all turned in early. The kids were tired from the hike, and the fire was nearly out. I zipped up the tent and settled in beside my family. Bear lay just inside the entrance, stiff and alert. I tried to ignore the dragging sound, but it came again, louder this time. It was slow and heavy, like a log being pulled across the dirt. The noise moved along the trail in fits and starts, stopping and starting, as if whoever or whatever was making it was cautious or unsure. Morning came and brought light and warmth. I stepped out of the tent first, still half asleep. Bear did not move. I noticed his hair was raised along his back and his eyes were locked on the trail. I followed his gaze and saw something that sent a cold rush through me. Across the narrow dirt path, Thick logs had been dragged and piled in a way that blocked any easy passage. The logs were fresh, leaves and dirt still stuck to the bark, and the marks in the ground showed they had been moved during the night. We were trapped, not by anything supernatural or imagined, just logs dragged across the trail, blocking the only way out. The forest felt different under the morning sun. The silence was heavier. My mind raced to explain what had happened. No other campers were around. The nearest ranger station was miles away. How could something large enough to move those logs be here without us hearing it clearly or seeing it? Bear refused to leave the tent all night. He must have sensed whatever it was that dragged those logs. The idea that a person or animal strong enough to do this had been near us in the dark filled me with unease. I scanned the trail for footprints or other signs, but there was nothing clear. The ground was soft, but no shoe prints or tire tracks. Just the dragged logs and disturbed leaves. I checked my phone out of habit, even though I knew there was no signal. No bars. No way to call for help. The quiet made the weight of our isolation sink in. The woods had swallowed us whole. We tried to lift and move the logs. They were heavy and awkward, some nearly as thick as my arm. The trail was too narrow, the ground uneven, and the logs slippery from moisture. Took a long time, but we managed to shift some of them enough to squeeze through. Bear did not budge from the tent. Once clear, we packed up quickly, our earlier excitement replaced by a careful, tense focus. The trip was over. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like something watched us from the shadows of the trees. Later, on the drive back, I thought about the night and what had happened. Nothing supernatural, no ghost stories, just something or someone moving logs in the dark to trap us. Maybe a hunter or someone hiding in the forest, wanting to keep people out or trap them. The idea felt too real to ignore. Bear stayed quiet for days after, not eager to go back outside. He trusted me, but he had seen or sensed something I had not. I learned that night the woods hold secrets that are not always explained by nature. Some things are better left unknown, and some instincts are there for a reason. We never went back to that spot. The forest stayed silent, but I could still hear the sound of those dragged logs every time I closed my eyes. I chose to camp near the lake because I wanted to get away from everything for a few days. The spot I picked was a small clearing just at the edge of the water, surrounded by tall pine trees. The lake was quiet and wide, with no one else around for miles. I set up my tent close to the shore, where I could see the water and hear the gentle waves lap against the rocks. The air was cool and smelled like damp earth and pine needles. I spent the afternoon collecting firewood and organizing my gear, feeling calm and alone in a way that only comes from being deep in nature. As the sun went down, the sky turned dark blue, then black. The stars appeared one by one, reflected softly on the smooth surface of the lake. I built a fire, sitting close enough to feel its warmth but far enough to avoid the smoke. The crackling of the burning wood mixed with the quiet sounds of insects and distant birds. The water looked like glass, calm and dark, stretching out to the far side where I could barely make out the shadowy outline of the opposite shore. I stayed by the fire until it started to die down. Then I went to the edge of the water. The cold from the lake brushed against my feet, making my skin tingle. I looked out into the darkness, feeling the stillness around me. It was peaceful but also heavy, like the silence was waiting for something to happen. I watched the moonlight shimmer on the ripples and noticed how the water seemed almost black beneath it. After a while, I went back to my tent and got ready to sleep. I zipped the flap closed but left it loose enough to hear the sounds outside. The night was colder than I expected, so I crawled deep into my sleeping bag and tried to settle my thoughts. Just as I was about to close my eyes, something caught my attention outside. I turned my head toward the lake and saw a dark shape standing in the water. It was about waist deep and did not move. At first, I thought it might be a person, but it was too still and too dark to tell clearly. The figure stood perfectly still, facing the woods behind me, not toward the campsite. I could not see any details, only the outline against the faint reflection of the moon. My heart started to beat faster, but I did not want to look away. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, thinking it could be a fisherman, someone who had come quietly without me noticing. The figure stayed in the lake for hours without moving. I watched from my tent, lying on my back with my eyes fixed on that spot. The night grew colder, but the shape did not change. Sometimes the water around it rippled gently, but the figure never shifted or made a sound. I felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity, unable to understand why someone would stand like that for so long. After what felt like an eternity, the figure finally turned and walked out of the water. I saw the water ripple as the legs moved through it, but still no splash or noise. The figure disappeared into the trees without looking back. Once it was gone, I noticed something else. The water near the shore where the figure had been standing stayed warm. It was not a heat that would last long, but enough to feel different from the cold lake around it. The warmth on the water confused me. I dipped my hand in and felt the temperature change immediately. It was almost like the water had been heated by something living. I did not know what to make of it, but I stayed awake for a long time after that, staring at the lake. The silence returned, but the feeling of that warm water stayed with me. The next morning, I checked the shoreline carefully. There were no footprints leading into or out of the water near my camp. No signs that anyone had been standing there all night. I searched the area around the trees where the figure had disappeared, but found nothing unusual. No campsites, no trash, no tracks. I packed up my gear and left the lake soon after. On the drive home, I thought about what I had seen. The shape in the water was real. I had not dreamed it or imagined it. Something had been standing there, motionless, for hours, then vanished without a trace. The warm water was proof it was not just a shadow or a trick of the light. I cannot explain why the figure stayed so still or what it wanted. Maybe it was a person with a reason I do not understand. Maybe it was someone testing the cold water for hours or waiting for something. Whatever it was human enough to leave no signs behind, careful enough to not disturb the lake. That night by the lake felt like a quiet warning. Sometimes nature holds secrets that do not make sense but are not supernatural. They are strange because they are real and do not fit the normal patterns we expect. I will never camp that close to the water again, and I will always remember the still figure standing in the cold lake, leaving behind only warmth and silence. I decided to go on a solo trip to clear my head after a long stretch of work and stress. I packed light, just a small backpack with some essentials, and picked a remote spot in the forest I had found on an old map. The place was deep in the woods, far from any roads or trails, surrounded by thick trees and rocky ground. I wanted to disconnect completely, no phone, no internet, just me and nature. I arrived late afternoon, the sun low and casting long shadows through the tall pine trees. The air smelled clean but sharp with pine and damp earth. I found a flat area surrounded by boulders and settled down to set up my small tent. The ground was covered in dry leaves and small stones, the kind that crunch softly underfoot. I chose a spot close to a large, flat rock that seemed perfect for sitting and watching the forest. As the light faded, I built a small fire with dry twigs I gathered nearby. The fire crackled and threw dancing shadows across the trees. I ate a simple meal, then lay back to watch the stars through the clearing. The night felt calm but alive with the quiet sounds of insects and the occasional rustle of branches. The forest was dark but not threatening, just heavy with stillness. I crawled into my sleeping bag, resting my head on a small pack. Soon, the fire died down to glowing embers. The night grew colder, but I was warm enough. That is when I first heard the sound. It was faint at first, soft and steady, like small stones clicking together. The noise was rhythmic, almost like a slow tapping or clinking that repeated with a strange, deliberate pace. At first, I thought it might be some animal moving over the rocks or branches, but the sound was too regular, too even. It was coming from just outside my tent, somewhere close. I lay still and listened, trying to tell if it was a natural sound or something else. The clicking continued, slow and rhythmic, neither speeding up nor stopping. I did not want to get out of the tent to look. The idea of walking into the dark forest alone felt wrong. Instead, I focused on the sound. It was steady, almost soothing in a strange way, but also deeply unsettling. The forest around me seemed silent except for this noise. I could hear no other animals, no wind, just the stones clicking together, one after the other, in a careful pattern. Hours passed. The clicking never stopped. I tried to ignore it and fall asleep, but could not. It felt like the noise was made by someone or something carefully arranging stones. But why here? Why so close? My mind ran through explanations. Maybe a raccoon or a fox knocking rocks, or branches scraping, but nothing seemed to fit. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I cautiously unzipped the tent. The cold morning air was fresh and clean. I stepped outside and looked around to find the source of the noise. The forest was quiet except for distant birdsong. Then I noticed it. All around my sleeping spot, in the dirt and small stones, was a spiral of rocks. Small stones carefully placed in a wide circle that curved inward toward where I had slept. The stones were perfectly aligned, each touching the next with no gaps. The spiral looked deliberate, too perfect to be a random natural formation. The circle started several feet from the edge of my sleeping bag and tightened as it moved inward, ending near my backpack. The stones were all similar in size, smooth and clean, unlike the rough stones scattered in the surrounding forest floor. I ran my hand along the spiral, feeling the cool surface of each rock. I looked closer to see if the stones showed signs of human handling. Some had small scratches or slight chips, as if they had been picked up and set down carefully. The ground around the spiral was undisturbed, no footprints or broken branches, as if whoever made it had moved lightly and silently. I thought about the night and the clicking sound. It must have been these stones moving, clicking as they bumped against each other while being arranged. But how? Who could have been out there in the dark, working quietly through the night, building the spiral right around my tent? The thought made my skin crawl. I looked around for any signs of people. Footprints, trash, anything, but found nothing. No tents, no fire pits, no evidence of recent human presence. The forest was empty except for me. I packed up quickly, taking one last look at the spiral. It felt like a message, a warning, or a test. The forest had held its secret all night, and I was left with a puzzle I could not solve. As I walked back through the trees toward my car, the sun rising higher, I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see someone following or watching. But the forest stayed quiet. The spiral of stones stayed behind me, a strange and silent mark in the earth, real and unexplained. The only proof of the night's strange rhythm and the careful hands that had been there, unseen but felt. I have never been able to explain what happened that night, but I know it was real. I know I was not alone, even if I never saw who or what made that spiral. It was the kind of fear that does not come from monsters or ghosts, but from knowing there is something in the world quietly moving around you, watching, waiting, without ever revealing itself. I set out early that morning, carrying only the essentials. The trail was quiet and narrow, winding through tall pine trees that reached high into the sky. The air smelled sharp with pine resin and damp earth. I had been hiking alone for years, always looking for places off the beaten path, where the crowds were few and nature felt untouched. This trip was no different. I wanted the solitude, the chance to clear my head far from the noise of daily life. The sun was bright but softened by the thick canopy overhead. I kept my pace steady, careful not to rush. The forest around me was mostly silent except for the occasional bird call and the distant hum of insects. The ground beneath my boots was soft with fallen needles and scattered pine cones. As the day went on, the trail grew steeper and the trees older and taller. There was something raw about this part of the forest, as if it had not seen many visitors for a long time. I stopped for a break near a cluster of towering pines. That is when I noticed the claw marks. They were high up on the trunks, jagged and deep. The bark was shredded, revealing pale wood underneath. The marks were too high to be made by any ordinary animal from the ground. I ran my hand over one, feeling the rough edges. It looked fresh, like it had been made recently. My mind raced with questions. What kind of animal could have climbed that high and left such marks? The thought made my skin crawl. I had seen bears before, but they did not climb trees like this. It had to be something else. I snapped a few pictures with my phone and moved on, trying to push the thought away. I kept walking until late afternoon when I found a clearing perfect for camping. It was flat and sheltered by thick trees. I set up my small tent quickly and gathered firewood. The forest was already growing dark around me, the sun dipping behind the hills. I built a fire and ate some simple food, watching the flames flicker. The quiet was peaceful, but I felt a strange tension underneath it. As night fell, I crawled into my sleeping bag inside the tent. The fire was out, and the forest was filled with unfamiliar sounds. Somewhere far away, an owl called. Leaves rustled in a gentle breeze. I was just about to close my eyes when I heard the first snap. It was a sharp crack above me. I froze, listening closely. Another branch broke, then another. It sounded like something large was moving through the branches just over the tent. I stayed perfectly still, heart pounding. The sounds were slow, deliberate. Branches snapped and scraped against the fabric of the tent. It was clear whatever it was had to be big and strong to climb so high and break limbs. I thought about bears again, but they usually did not climb like that, especially not above a tent. The noises moved slowly, circling overhead. I could hear heavy breathing mixed with the sound of claws scraping bark. I thought about calling for help, but I was deep in the woods with no signal. I did not want to make noise and attract attention. My mind raced with every possible explanation. Could it be a large predator? A mountain lion, maybe? They were rare in this area, but not impossible. Or maybe a bear testing the camp. Whatever it was close and curious, and it was watching me. The sounds went on for what felt like hours. Each snap of a branch made me tense up. I stayed inside the tent, trying to keep calm, telling myself not to panic. I kept my flashlight nearby, ready in case I needed it. But I did not want to risk shining it outside. I felt trapped between the safety of the thin nylon and the unknown above. When the noises finally stopped, I did not move right away. The forest fell silent again, but the tension did not leave my body. My mind replayed the sounds over and over. I was sure I had not imagined them. At dawn, I packed up as quickly as I could, still shaken. I scanned the trees around the clearing. The claw marks were still visible, but now they seemed even more threatening. I hiked out faster than I had come in, the weight of the night pressing on me. Later, when I was safe in my car and back on the road, I looked up local reports. There had been sightings of a large mountain lion in the area, one that had been seen climbing trees and leaving deep scratches on bark. Some hikers reported feeling watched, hearing branches snap at night near their tents. I realized then what I must have encountered. It was not a ghost or a monster, just a wild animal following its instincts, curious and cautious around humans. But knowing that did not make it any less terrifying. The idea of something so powerful moving just above me in the dark, so close that I could hear its claws scraping wood, was enough to keep me from returning to that spot. The forest can feel peaceful, but it is home to creatures that belong there. I learned that night that sometimes you are not alone out there, no matter how quiet it seems. Respecting the wild means understanding that you are the visitor, and sometimes the visitor can become prey or at least a subject of curiosity for the creatures living there. I left with a new caution, one that will stay with me on every hike from now on. I set out early that morning, carrying only the essentials. The trail was quiet and narrow, winding through tall pine trees that reached high into the sky. The air smelled sharp with pine resin and damp earth. I had been hiking alone for years, always looking for places off the beaten path, where the crowds were few and nature felt untouched. This trip was no different. I wanted the solitude, the chance to clear my head far from the noise of daily life. The sun was bright but softened by the thick canopy overhead. I kept my pace steady, careful not to rush. The forest around me was mostly silent except for the occasional bird call and the distant hum of insects. The ground beneath my boots was soft with fallen needles and scattered pine cones. As the day went on, the trail grew steeper and the trees older and taller. There was something raw about this part of the forest, as if it had not seen many visitors for a long time. I stopped for a break near a cluster of towering pines. That is when I noticed the claw marks. They were high up on the trunks, jagged and deep. The bark was shredded, revealing pale wood underneath. The marks were too high to be made by any ordinary animal from the ground. I ran my hand over one, feeling the rough edges. It looked fresh, like it had been made recently. My mind raced with questions. What kind of animal could have climbed that high and left such marks? The thought made my skin crawl. I had seen bears before, but they did not climb trees like this. It had to be something else. I snapped a few pictures with my phone and moved on, trying to push the thought away. I kept walking until late afternoon when I found a clearing perfect for camping. It was flat and sheltered by thick trees. I set up my small tent quickly and gathered firewood. The forest was already growing dark around me, the sun dipping behind the hills. I built a fire and ate some simple food, watching the flames flicker. The quiet was peaceful, but I felt a strange tension underneath it. As night fell, I crawled into my sleeping bag inside the tent. The fire was out, and the forest was filled with unfamiliar sounds. Somewhere far away, an owl called. Leaves rustled in a gentle breeze. I was just about to close my eyes when I heard the first snap. It was a sharp crack above me. I froze, listening closely. Another branch broke, then another. It sounded like something large was moving through the branches just over the tent. I stayed perfectly still, heart pounding. The sounds were slow, deliberate. Branches snapped and scraped against the fabric of the tent. It was clear whatever it was had to be big and strong to climb so high and break limbs. I thought about bears again, but they usually did not climb like that, especially not above a tent. The noises moved slowly, circling overhead. I could hear heavy breathing mixed with the sound of claws scraping bark. I thought about calling for help, but I was deep in the woods with no signal. I did not want to make noise and attract attention. My mind raced with every possible explanation. Could it be a large predator? A mountain lion, maybe? They were rare in this area, but not impossible. Or maybe a bear testing the camp. Whatever it was close and curious, and it was watching me. The sounds went on for what felt like hours. Each snap of a branch made me tense up. I stayed inside the tent, trying to keep calm, telling myself not to panic. I kept my flashlight nearby, ready in case I needed it. But I did not want to risk shining it outside. I felt trapped between the safety of the thin nylon and the unknown above. When the noises finally stopped, I did not move right away. The forest fell silent again, but the tension did not leave my body. My mind replayed the sounds over and over. I was sure I had not imagined them. At dawn, I packed up as quickly as I could, still shaken. I scanned the trees around the clearing. The claw marks were still visible, but now they seemed even more threatening. I hiked out faster than I had come in, the weight of the night pressing on me. Later, when I was safe in my car and back on the road, I looked up local reports. There had been sightings of a large mountain lion in the area, one that had been seen climbing trees and leaving deep scratches on bark. Some hikers reported feeling watched, hearing branches snap at night near their tents. I realized then what I must have encountered. It was not a ghost or a monster, just a wild animal following its instincts, curious and cautious around humans. But knowing that did not make it any less terrifying. The idea of something so powerful moving just above me in the dark, so close that I could hear its claws scraping wood, was enough to keep me from returning to that spot. The forest can feel peaceful, but it is home to creatures that belong there. I learned that night that sometimes you are not alone out there, no matter how quiet it seems. Respecting the wild means understanding that you are the visitor, and sometimes the visitor can become prey or at least a subject of curiosity for the creatures living there. I left with a new caution, one that will stay with me on every hike from now on. After my dad died, I went back to the place where we used to spend weekends. It was a small patch of woods near the old river, a spot that had been ours for years. I thought going there alone might help me feel closer to him. I was wrong. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the trees, the sky turning from blue to a dull gray. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. The woods were quiet, except for the soft rustling of branches in the light wind. I set up my small tent in the clearing where we always camped. The ground was soft but firm, covered in pine needles and a scattering of twigs. I made a small fire, the flames flickering and casting long shadows across the trees. The warmth felt good against the cool air. I thought about my dad while watching the fire die down. The night grew colder. I decided to explore the brush around the campsite with just a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness but did not reach very far. I walked carefully, stepping over roots and loose stones. The woods felt different at night, quieter and heavier. I could hear my breath, slow and steady. Somewhere nearby, an owl hooted once. I kept moving, trying not to think too much. The silence was a weight pressing on my chest. Then I noticed something. Between the thick bushes, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something walking upright. It was not a deer or any animal I recognized. It moved slowly, stepping carefully. Every time I stopped, it stopped too. I froze, my heart pounding loud enough to feel in my ears. I pointed the flashlight at the spot, but the shadows swallowed the light. When I moved again, it moved again. It was watching me, keeping its distance. I did not want to turn back, not yet. I felt a strange pull, like I needed to know what was there. I moved slowly through the brush, trying to keep quiet. The thing followed, always just out of clear sight. At one point, I tripped over a root and almost fell. It froze and disappeared for a moment. When I looked up, it was gone. But then I saw the footprints. They were fresh. The ground was soft from recent rain, perfect for prints. The footprints were larger than mine, with toes spread too wide and pressed too deep into the dirt. I crouched down and looked closely. They did not match any human foot I had ever seen. The toes were longer, wider, like they belonged to something made to walk silently and with great weight. The depth of the print told me that whoever or whatever made them was heavy. I followed the prints. They led through thick bushes and fallen branches deeper into the woods. The further I went, the harder it was to see the path. The moon was hidden behind clouds, leaving only faint starlight. The cold seeped through my jacket, and I could feel sweat on my back from the effort. The prints stopped near a small stream. I saw broken branches and crushed grass. The tracks led on the other side, but I hesitated. Something felt wrong. I could no longer hear the usual night sounds. No frogs, no crickets, nothing but the quiet splash of water. I stayed still and listened. I thought I heard breathing, low and steady, coming from the shadows across the stream. My skin prickled. I did not want to see what made those prints, but curiosity kept pulling me forward. I crossed the stream carefully, stepping on wet stones. The footprints continued on the other side, leading toward an old fallen tree. I followed them slowly, every sense alert. The brush here was thick, full of thorny branches that scratched my arms. I kept looking behind me, but nothing followed. It was like the thing had stopped tracking me once I crossed the water. The prints ended abruptly near the fallen tree. I scanned the area with my flashlight. I saw nothing unusual, no sign of a person or animal. But then I noticed the broken bark on the tree, the deep scratches running along the trunk. The marks were fresh, and they looked like claws or sharp nails. My heart tightened. I stayed there for a moment, breathing hard, feeling the weight of the night around me. The woods had gone completely silent. It was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes your skin crawl. I knew then that I could not stay. The idea of whatever left those prints being close filled me with a deep unease. I made my way back to camp, moving faster but carefully. The branches scratched my face and arms, and my flashlight flickered once or twice. I kept checking behind me but saw nothing. When I finally reached the clearing, the fire was almost out. I added some wood and sat close to the small flame, watching the dark woods beyond the light. Sleep did not come easily. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept thinking about the footprints and the strange presence moving through the brush. I understood then that my dad's old woods held secrets I never wanted to know. He had loved this place, but now it felt different, almost hostile. In the morning, the light made the woods look gentle again. I packed my things quietly and took one last walk around the clearing. I found the footprints again near the edge of the trees, half faded but still clear. I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill my lungs. I knew I would not come back here at night. Some things in the dark are better left alone. I left that place behind and never told anyone what I saw. The woods were no longer just a place for memories. They had become a warning, and I carried that warning with me, knowing some parts of the world are quiet for a reason. My name is Aaron. I set out alone into the forest with the goal of testing my survival skills. I wanted to spend the day relying on what I had learned over the years, finding food, making shelter, staying alert. The woods I chose were dense, full of tall pines and thick underbrush. I arrived early in the morning just as the sun was rising, the light cutting through the mist in sharp beams. The air smelled clean and sharp, filled with pine and earth. It was the kind of place where sound seemed swallowed, where the smallest noise could feel like it echoed forever. I moved quietly, careful with each step, making sure not to disturb the natural rhythm of the forest. I carried only what I thought was essential: a knife, a small pack with some basic supplies, a water bottle, and a map that I never fully trusted. From the start, something about the day felt different. I tried to push the feeling aside as nervous energy, but it stayed with me, like a low hum at the edge of my thoughts. As I walked deeper into the woods, I felt like I was being watched. There was no direct sign, no broken branches or disturbed leaves, but the sensation kept growing. Every time I stopped, I glanced around, expecting to catch a glimpse of someone or something. Nothing ever showed up. The forest was empty and silent, but that feeling never left me. It was like something was tracking me just out of sight, moving with me but never revealing itself. I tested my skills by gathering some edible plants and setting a small trap for rabbits. I built a rough shelter between two trees and collected wood for a fire. Still, the feeling stayed there, a quiet pressure I could not shake. The sun moved across the sky, the shadows shifting and stretching, and I kept moving, always alert, always watching. I left clear footprints in the soft dirt and fallen leaves as I traveled, and I noticed I was careful not to step on broken twigs or noisy branches. My senses felt sharper than usual. Every crack or snap made me tense. By late afternoon, I began to realize that the feeling was not just in my mind. It was real. I was being followed. Something had been moving behind me all day, close enough to keep up but never close enough to show itself. It was patient and quiet, avoiding every sign I might notice. It did not chase or rush, simply stayed there, always just behind like a shadow. I considered turning back, but I wanted to prove to myself that I could handle this. I knew the forest well enough to find my way, and I kept my pace steady, trying to ignore the cold sweat on my neck and the tightness in my chest. I kept checking my surroundings, glancing over my shoulder whenever I thought I could get away with it. Each time I saw nothing, just the trees and the fading light. When evening came, I found a small clearing to set up my camp for the night. I cleared a spot, gathered more wood, and started a fire. The flames flickered and cast long shadows on the trees around me. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the forest changed. Night creatures began to stir, and the wind whispered through the branches. I kept my knife close and my senses sharp. After a while, I looked down at the ground near the edge of the clearing. My footprints ended there. The last clear marks of where I had come from stopped at that line. I stared at the ground, suddenly feeling exposed. I scanned the surrounding trees, searching for anything that might be out of place. That is when I noticed it. A figure stood just beyond the last footprint. It was motionless, barely visible in the shadows. It did not move or make a sound. It just stood there watching. My heart pounded, but I did not feel panic. Instead, a cold calm settled over me. The figure was human, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes that blended with the night. There was no face visible, only the vague shape of a person. I realized this was what had been following me all day. It had been careful, keeping out of sight, never rushing, never making a noise. It was patient, watching my every move. I stayed still, not wanting to make any sudden movements. The firelight flickered between us, and I noticed the figure's eyes reflecting faintly in the dark. I thought about calling out or moving, but I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I reached slowly for my pack and took out a flashlight. I clicked it on and shone the beam directly at the figure. The light hit the person, and they took a step back, disappearing further into the trees. I could see the shape retreating, slipping away into the night. My heart slowed as the figure vanished completely. I was left alone, but I felt a mix of relief and unease. I thought about what had just happened. Why would someone follow me all day without showing themselves? Why wait until nightfall to stand at the edge of my footprints? It did not seem like a random act or a prank. This was deliberate. Someone had watched me, tracked me through the forest, waiting silently. The next morning, I left quickly. I did not want to stay in that place any longer than necessary. I stuck to the path and kept moving until I reached the road. When I got back home, I checked the news and local reports. There had been stories about a man living rough in the woods nearby. Someone who stayed hidden, watching hikers and campers, careful never to get caught. That person fit the pattern of what I experienced. I never went back to that forest. I realized that testing my survival skills was not just about the environment or nature. Sometimes, the biggest danger is not the wild but another person. Someone patient enough to follow you all day without being seen and wait for the moment you are most vulnerable. That day stayed with me. It changed the way I looked at being alone outside. I learned to respect the silence in the woods, but also to watch for shadows that move just beyond the edge of your sight. My name is Lucas. I went with my girlfriend to save money on a trip we had planned for months. Hotels were expensive and we both liked the idea of being away from people. We chose a forest that allowed camping without a fee if you stayed far from marked trails. It was late fall. The drive took most of the day and the sky stayed gray the whole time. By the time we parked, the ground was already soaked from recent rain. Every step pressed water out of the soil like a sponge. The forest felt closed in. Trees stood close together and blocked the wind. The air smelled like wet leaves and old wood. There were no birds, no insects. The quiet felt heavy, like it was holding something back. We walked deeper to avoid being seen from the road and found a small clearing with flattened grass. The ground sloped slightly and water ran slowly downhill in thin lines. I noticed tracks in the mud but did not think much of it. Deer passed through places like this all the time. Setting up the tent took longer than it should have. The fabric clung to itself from the damp air. My hands were cold and stiff. By the time we finished, the light was already fading. We ate simple food and sat close together, wrapped in our jackets. The forest darkened fast. When night came, it felt sudden, like a door closing. Inside the tent, everything sounded louder. Every drip from the trees landed with a sharp tap. Water slid down branches and dropped onto leaves below. The ground smelled stronger now. Mud, rot, and something metallic from the wet soil. We lay close, trying to sleep. The forest stayed silent in a way that did not feel calm. Felt watchful. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a soft sound. It came from the side of the tent near my feet. It was not a scrape or a tear. It was a flat sound like a hand or something broad touching the fabric. Then it happened again. Gentle, slow, a slap without force. The fabric pushed in and returned to shape. The sound repeated, always in the same spot, always measured. My body went tense. I listened hard. There were no steps, no breathing that I could hear, just the slow touch against the tent. It did not feel random. It felt careful, like something was learning what the material was. The slapping continued for minutes at a time, then stopped, then started again. Each time it paused, I waited for it to leave. It never fully did. I thought about animals. A raccoon would scratch. A bear would push hard. A deer might brush against it by accident, but this was too deliberate. The pressure stayed even. The fabric never tore. The sound stayed soft. My heart beat fast and steady. I stayed still. Any movement felt like it would change the balance of whatever was happening. At one point, the slapping moved slightly higher, closer to where our bodies were. The tent wall pressed inward more than before. I could feel the cold air through the fabric where it stretched. Then it stopped. I waited. The forest remained quiet. No retreating sound. No movement away. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back into shallow sleep. Morning light came pale and weak through the trees. When I sat up, the air inside the tent smelled wrong. It was sharp and thick, like salt left on skin after sweat dries, mixed with a copper scent that reminded me of blood. The smell clung to the fabric. It made my stomach turn. Outside, the forest looked the same, but the ground near the tent told a story. The mud was torn up along one side. Clear tracks pressed deep into the soil. Deer tracks, but heavier than normal. Close together. There were drag marks and smears in the dirt. On the tent wall where the slapping happened, the fabric was darkened in streaks. When I touched it, my fingers came away sticky. I followed the tracks a short distance downhill. About 20 feet away, I found the source. A young deer lay on its side near a fallen tree. Its leg was twisted at a bad angle, caught between roots. The body was still warm. There were cuts along its chest and shoulder where it had rubbed against rough bark. Blood had soaked into its fur. Salt from sweat and minerals from the soil mixed with it. The smell matched the tent. It became clear then. During the night, the deer must have been injured nearby. In pain and confused, it moved toward the tent, drawn by the salt from our sweat soaked into the fabric. Animals crave salt. Pressed its body and head against the tent, testing it, rubbing against it, trying to reach the scent. The gentle slapping was not hands. It was flesh and muscle moving slowly, carefully, because it was weak. The deer likely collapsed not long after. The forest had stayed quiet because pain takes sound away. By morning, it was dead. The marks on the tent were from its body and blood. The smell was proof of how close it had been. We packed up without eating. I cleaned my hands in the wet grass, but the smell stayed faintly on my skin. As we walked back to the car, I kept thinking about how thin the tent wall had been. A simple layer between us and an animal driven by instinct and pain. Nothing supernatural had been there. Just a wounded creature doing what it needed to survive. I do not camp anymore. Saving money does not feel worth that kind of closeness. When I smell wet leaves and metal after rain, I remember the soft slapping sound in the dark and how careful it was. That memory stays clear because I understand it fully. Knowing what happened does not make it less disturbing. It makes it worse. I was 9 the summer my uncle took me camping by a slow river that cut through pine woods. My parents trusted him because he worked outdoors and knew how to keep things simple and safe. The site was not a campground with signs and rules. It was a clearing he had used before, far from roads, with a stone ring he had built for fires. We arrived late in the day. The light was low and flat. The air smelled like sap and wet soil. I remember the sound of insects starting up as we set our packs down. He showed me where to put my sleeping bag and told me to keep my boots close. I watched him gather dead branches and start the fire. The flames made the trees look taller than they were. I was tired from the hike and the heat. I ate from a tin plate and drank water that tasted like metal. The fire popped and threw sparks that died in the dark. My uncle sat with his back to the river and cleaned a knife on his pant leg. He always did things in a calm way. That steadiness made me feel safe. When the fire burned down to coals, he covered it with dirt and set our small lantern by our bags. We crawled into our sleeping bags with the sounds of the woods around us. The river made a low, steady rush. My uncle lay a few feet behind me so he could see the clearing. I faced the fire ring and the trees beyond it. Sleep came in pieces. I woke once to a bird call and once to the sound of something moving through brush. Each time I told myself it was normal. I was a kid but not stupid. I knew animals lived there. The The third time I woke, the fire was out and the lantern was dim. The clearing was a circle of gray with black shapes at the edge. I could see the fire ring and the packed dirt around it. At the far side of the light, right where the trees began, someone stood. The shape was still. It was a man shape with shoulders and a head. He faced away from me toward the woods. He wore a jacket like my uncle's and a hat with a low crown. The back of his neck was pale in the weak light. For a moment my mind filled in details without thought. I assumed my uncle had gotten up to check something. Maybe he heard an animal. I felt the comfort of that idea settle in my chest. Then I heard snoring behind me. It was soft but steady. It was the same sound he made at home when he fell asleep on the couch. My body went cold from the inside. I did not turn right away. I listened again. The snoring rose and fell. I knew where it came from. I knew how far away it was. The man at the edge of the light did not move. I lay there staring. My eyes adjusted more. The jacket was darker than I first thought. The hat brim cast a shadow that hid the ears. The stance was wrong for my uncle. The feet were set close together. My uncle stood with weight on one leg. This person stood like a post. I wanted to pull the sleeping bag over my head, but I did not move. I was afraid any sound would draw attention. The woods beyond the figure were black. The trees made a wall. The air smelled like ash and cold dirt. Time stretched. My heart beat so hard I felt it in my throat. The figure shifted. It did not turn. It stepped backward, one foot then the other, straight into the dark. The movement was careful, like someone trying not to make noise. The shoulders stayed square to the clearing. The head did not turn. The shape slid into the trees and the light lost it. The space where it stood became empty. I lay there shaking. I waited for branches to snap or leaves to rustle. Nothing came. The river kept its sound. The insects went on. After a long time, I rolled onto my side and looked back. My uncle slept on his back with his mouth open. His chest rose and fell. I could see his boots by his bag where he left them. I stayed awake until morning. The sky lightened from black to blue. When the sun reached the clearing, the fear drained but did not leave. I looked for tracks near the edge of the light. The ground there was hard and covered with needles. I found nothing clear. My uncle woke and stretched. He noticed I was quiet and tired. He checked the fire ring and the packs. Nothing was gone. Later that day we packed up and left. On the walk out I kept looking at the trees. I did not tell him what I saw. I did not have words that made sense. Years passed before I could place it in my mind without panic. As an adult, I went back to that area with maps and old records. I learned there had been a small hunting cabin less than a mile from our spot. It was abandoned by then but still used by locals for shelter. I learned that poachers sometimes watched camps to see if people left food out. I learned that another trail crossed near the river and cut through the woods behind our clearing. A person walking that trail could step off and reach the edge of our light without making much sound on needles. I also learned how the mind works when it wakes from deep sleep, how it fills gaps, how it matches shapes to what it expects. A man in a dark jacket and a hat can look like someone you know when you are half dreaming. Standing still can hide small differences. Facing away removes the face, the mane. I went solo to hunt elk because I wanted quiet and control. Late season meant cold nights and empty trails. I packed light but not careless. Rifle, pack, tarp, game bags, headlamp, small stove. I hiked in before sunset and set camp in a timber pocket above a frozen creek. Snow was old and crusted. The moon was thin and gave no help. The air had that sharp smell that comes when everything is locked and still. I found a cow the next morning moving along the edge of a burn. The shot was clean. Work took hours because daylight was short and the cold made my hands slow. I quartered the elk and hung 2 bags from a thick branch away from camp. I carried 1 heavy quarter back and laid it on a tarp near my tent. I planned to haul the rest in the morning. I ate, cleaned tools, and checked the wind. It stayed steady down the creek. That mattered. I slept in short pieces. The cold kept waking me. Around 3 in the morning, I woke fully and knew something was wrong before I moved. The woods felt pressed flat, like sound had been taken away. No breeze, no creak noise. I listened and heard nothing. I lay there counting breaths. My headlamp was beside me. My rifle leaned against a tree just outside the tent flap. I reached for the zipper and stopped. The smell was different. Not rot, not blood. It was a damp animal smell, faint but real. I eased the flap open a hand width and let my eyes adjust. Snow held the light well. I could see the tarp shape, but something was missing. The elk quarter was not there. I stayed still and listened again. No footfalls, no brush snap. I waited long enough for my legs to start shaking. Then I crawled out and stood slow. The tarp was folded in on itself like it had been picked clean. There was no blood splash, no drag mark, no torn fibers. The ground showed nothing but my own prints from earlier and a smooth stretch where the meat had been. I swept the headlamp low and wide. Nothing moved. I followed the edge of camp and checked the tree where the other quarters hung. The rope was still tight. The bags still swung. Whatever took the meat had chosen the easy piece and left the rest. I walked a small circle with the light. Snow tells stories if you know how to read it. The snow told none. No pad marks. No claw lines. No tail sweep. The crust had not broken. It was like the quarter had lifted and vanished. I knew that was not true. Something strong and careful had taken it. Something that knew how to move. I went back to the tent and sat. My mind ran through animals. Wolves leave sign. Bears tear and leave mess even when quiet. Coyotes cannot lift that weight without noise. Cat made sense. A big one. They kill without sound and carry like shadows. They also watch. I thought about the wind. Down the creek meant my scent carried away. A cat could have come from above and left the same way. I checked the time again. The night was not close to ending. I thought about moving the rest of the meat. I thought about the rifle. I thought about turning my back. Every plan ended with me bending down or reaching up, eyes away from the dark. I did not chase tracks because there were none. I did not fire because there was nothing to aim at. I stood with the headlamp off and let my eyes work. The woods stayed empty. That was worse. When the sky began to pale, I packed fast. I did not break camp clean. I rolled the tarp, stuffed the bag, and took only what I needed to move. I left the hanging quarters. That choice felt heavy but clear. Meat can be replaced. Distance matters more. I picked a route that kept open ground to my left and timber to my right so I could watch both without turning. I did not sling the rifle. I left it leaning where it had been all night. Carrying it would have forced my shoulders back at times. I wanted my chest forward and my eyes wide. As I moved, I watched the snow. Half a mile out, I saw the first sign. A shallow mark where something heavy had been set down. The crust was pressed but not broken. A few steps later, another mark. The spacing was wide and even. Whatever carried the quarter did it with ease and patience. The marks angled uphill, away from the creek, toward broken rock and deadfall where cats cache food. I stopped there and did not go farther. I kept moving until my legs burned and my breath fogged hard. When I reached the truck, the sun was up and the woods sounded normal again. Birds, wind, water. I sat on the tailgate and let the shaking pass. Later that day, I reported the lost meat. A local officer listened and nodded. He said a lion would take a quarter clean and leave little sign in cold, crusted snow. He said they often watch camp first and move when people sleep. He said leaving without the rifle was smart if I felt watched because turning invites trouble more than walking away. I went back weeks later with a partner to recover what was left. We found the hanging bags torn open and empty. We found a scrape under a log where bones were dragged and covered. Everything fit. No mystery remained. The night had been quiet because the animal knew how to be quiet. The meat was gone because it was easy. I left because I understood then that I was not alone, and staying would have asked for a second test I did not need to pass. The rain started earlier than the forecast said it would. I was already deep in the trees, far from any road, with my pack soaked through and my boots holding water. Turning back would have meant climbing slick rock and crossing a creek that was already rising, so I chose to stay. I found a small flat patch between young pines and set my tent before the sky went fully dark. The air smelled wet and green, heavy with rot and sap. I ate cold food because my stove would not light in the damp. I wiped my hands on my pants and zipped the tent shut while the rain grew harder. By the time night settled in, the rain was steady and loud. It hit the fabric in waves and rolled down the sides. The ground softened under me. Water crept under the floor and chilled my back. I lay still and listened to the forest change as the wind picked up. Branches rubbed together. Somewhere a tree cracked and dropped a limb. The smell inside the tent shifted as damp gear warmed from my body heat. It was sharp and stale. I opened the vents to keep air moving. Hours passed without sleep. The rain trapped me in place. Every time I started to drift, a gust would shake the tent or a drop would hit the nylon right above my face. I checked my watch again and again, waiting for the worst of it to pass. Sometime after midnight, the rain slowed to a steady hiss. That was when I noticed another sound close by, slow and careful, moving through the brush. At first I thought it was wind pushing leaves. Then it paused, and I heard breathing. It was low and deep. It came from just outside the tent wall, close enough that the fabric moved inward with each breath. The sound slid along the side, stopping near the vents above my head. Something sniffed the air. The noise was wet and steady, drawing in long pulls through a nose wide enough to move air with weight behind it. A smell pushed in through the mesh. It was hot and sour, like damp fur mixed with breath. It did not fade like a passing animal. Stayed thick and close. The sniffing continued, slow and focused, as if whatever was there was sorting through the scent of my body and my gear. I could picture the shape of a head just inches away, nose lifted, testing the air. I held still. My hands were pressed flat against the ground. My chest felt tight and shallow. I knew better than to reach for food or make noise. I had sealed everything earlier, hung my bag away from camp, but the smell of me was enough. The breathing shifted, moving along the length of the tent. Fabric brushed against something solid. A claw or hoof scraped dirt. The tent bowed inward for a moment, then released. The animal circled. I tracked it by sound alone. It moved slowly, heavy weight placed with care. Each step sank into the wet soil. It paused often to sniff again, each time closer to my face than I wanted to accept. The rain began to pick up again, masking some of the sound, but not the breathing. The smell grew stronger when it returned to the vents. Heat rolled in with it, living heat, the kind that comes from a body built to move through cold nights. Time lost shape. I counted breaths to stay calm. I thought about how thin the fabric was, how little stood between me and whatever had decided to inspect my shelter. I knew bears lived in the area. I also knew wild hogs had been moving north. Both could break saplings without effort. Both could circle a tent out of curiosity. The difference mattered, but not enough to change what I could do, which was nothing. At some point, the animal leaned close enough that the mesh pressed against something wet. The sniffing stopped. The breathing stayed. Felt like waiting for a decision. I stayed frozen, eyes open in the dark, rain tapping above. After a long stretch, the breathing pulled away. Footsteps retreated a short distance, then stopped again. The animal stayed nearby. It moved back and forth, never far, always within a few steps. Near dawn, the rain thinned. The forest lightened from black to gray. The sounds changed. Birds stirred. The breathing faded into the background noise of the woods. I waited longer until the light was clear and steady. Only then did I unzip the tent enough to look out. The campsite looked wrong. Young trees around the tent were snapped and bent inward, their tops pointing toward where I lay. The ground was torn up in a wide circle. Mud held deep tracks pressed into it, broad and clear. I saw the shape of a large paw, 5 toes, the heel heavy and sunk deep. Wet hair clung to a broken branch. It was dark and coarse. A pile of scat sat near the edge of camp, steaming slightly in the cool air, full of berries and plant matter. The pattern made sense then. A bear had come through during the storm, drawn by scent and shelter. The broken saplings showed where it had pushed through without care. The circling tracks showed inspection, not attack. The sniffing at the vents was the bear trying to place me, confused by the fabric holding my smell in place. The hot, sour smell was breath and fur soaked by rain, held close in still air. I packed fast with shaking hands. I checked every corner of the woods before stepping out. Nothing moved. I left the area at first light, following the creek down until I reached a wider trail. The fear stayed with me for hours, but it settled into something solid and explainable. I had been trapped by weather in a place where I did not belong that night. A large animal had crossed paths with me, curious and cautious, close enough to remind me how small I was. I was not chosen as prey. I was noticed, measured, and spared. That knowledge stayed clear as I walked away, every step taking me farther from the bent trees and the place where the forest had leaned in to breathe me in. My name is Nathan K. I went fishing with some coworkers last summer. We had all been stuck in the office for months and wanted a break from the usual routine. None of us were expert fishermen, but we thought a weekend by the lake would be a good way to relax and bond. We planned the trip carefully, packed gear, food, and sleeping bags, and set out early one Saturday morning. The drive was long but quiet, with the trees growing thicker as we got closer to the remote area we chose. The lake itself was smaller than I expected, surrounded by dense woods that looked untouched for years. We found a narrow dirt path that led down to the water. It was barely wide enough for our truck, and the ground was soft and damp in places. After parking, we walked along the shore looking for a good spot to set up camp. It was late afternoon when we stumbled upon it. A small clearing just off the water with a fire pit and some old logs arranged like benches. What caught my eye first were the piles of fish bones stacked carefully by size, lined up in neat rows on a fallen log near the fire pit. The bones were bleached white by the sun, dry and brittle, and they looked like someone had taken time to sort them by length and thickness. It was strange to see such an organized display in a place that looked so abandoned. The air was warm but carried a faint smell of decaying plants and water. Insects buzzed around, and the surface of the lake was calm, reflecting the sky as the sun lowered behind the trees. We decided to set up there, figuring the spot must have been used before by fishermen or campers. We pitched our tents in a rough semicircle around the fire pit and unpacked our gear. No one mentioned the fish bones much, but I could tell everyone noticed. Felt eerie, like we were walking into someone else's world. As the light faded, we started a fire, hoping to cook some of the small fish we had caught earlier. The sound of the water lapping gently against the shore was soothing. I felt tired but content. The sky darkened quickly, and soon only the fire cast warm light on the clearing. The trees around us stood like silent guards. The night grew cooler, and the quiet was broken only by the occasional call of a distant bird or the crackle of the fire. Around midnight, the stillness changed. I woke up to a sudden noise. It was coming from the lake, something splashing close to the shore. At first, I thought it might be a fish jumping, or maybe an animal in the water. But the splashing was too loud and heavy to be just a fish. It sounded like something big moving through the water, with wet, heavy thuds breaking the silence. The rhythm was slow but steady, like something large was walking or dragging itself along the shallow edge. I kept still, listening. The others were asleep in their tents. The splashing continued, moving from one side of the shore to the other, circling near the campsite. It was far heavier than any fish I had ever seen or heard. There were no waves or ripples spreading out the way you would expect if a normal animal was swimming. Instead, the water sounded thick and slow, like something enormous was forcing its way through. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My heart started pounding. I tried to tell myself it was probably a bear or some other wild animal, but the sounds were not quite right. It was as if the thing making them was trying to avoid making noise but failing. Every splash sounded deliberate, like slow footsteps in the water. I moved quietly to the edge of the clearing and peered into the dark water. The moon was hidden behind clouds, so I could not see far. The surface looked black and still, except for faint ripples near the shore. There was no sign of anything visible, but the splashing grew louder for a moment, then stopped suddenly. The The silence that followed was worse than the noise, pressed in on me thick and heavy. I backed away and went back to my tent. I did not want to wake anyone yet, but I felt frozen in place. I lay there for a long time, listening for any sign that the noise would return. After a while, I thought I heard low movement around the tents, like branches brushing or feet stepping on leaves. I did not want to believe someone else was out there, but the thought made me more afraid. Suddenly, the fire flickered and nearly went out. The wind picked up cold and sharp. The lake remained silent, but the feeling around us changed. The neat piles of fish bones seemed to stare back at me in the firelight, and I wondered how long they had been there and who had arranged them. I shook the thought away and stood up. I whispered to myself that this was just the wilderness, nothing more. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. We packed quietly, not waking anyone, and grabbed what we could carry quickly. I left my fishing gear and some of the food behind. No one said a word. The heavy splashing had never returned, but the weight of the night hung over us like a shadow. We made it back to the truck without incident. Driving away, I looked back at the dark outline of the lake and the trees. I still do not know what made those noises or why the fish bones were arranged with such care. I do not want to know. That place was not meant for us. We left everything behind that night and have never gone back. Even now, I remember the sound of the water, heavy and slow, and the feeling that something big was watching us, waiting just below the surface. I set out that afternoon with a clear goal. I wanted to test my new camping gear in real conditions before a longer trip. It was early autumn, the kind of chill in the air that hints at winter coming but does not fully arrive. I chose a spot in a state forest known for being quiet and remote, a place with tall pines and thick underbrush that would block most signs of civilization. The walk-in was about 2 miles, mostly flat but with soft moss and fallen leaves underfoot. I carried my pack carefully, knowing I wanted to keep my setup light but solid. I found a small clearing just off the main trail, far enough from any other campsites to feel completely alone. The evening passed calmly. I pitched my tent, a new model with a sturdy frame and a tightly sealed zipper. I tested every feature, making sure nothing was broken or loose. After eating a small meal, I set a fire ring and gathered a few dry sticks. The fire burned steadily, casting flickering shadows on the trees. The quiet around me was deep, almost unnerving in its completeness. No cars, no voices, only the occasional rustle of leaves or a distant bird calling. I thought about how different this was from city life. The isolation felt peaceful at first, a chance to disconnect. But as night deepened, the weight of being alone settled in differently. I crawled into my sleeping bag around 11. The tent's interior was warm, sealed off from the crisp air outside. I zipped the tent door fully, feeling the smooth teeth lock tightly. I lay back and closed my eyes, hearing only the crackle of the dying fire just outside the tent. My mind started to drift. The wind shifted and moved through the branches overhead, soft sounds mixing with the night. Every now and then, a twig snapped somewhere far off. I felt safe. The tent was new, my gear was reliable. I was prepared for anything the woods might throw at me. Around 2 in the morning, I woke suddenly. Something was off. The air inside the tent felt colder, the silence heavier. Then I heard it. A faint sound, slow and deliberate, coming from outside. It was the unmistakable noise of a zipper being pulled. The slow, dragging sound of the zipper teeth sliding against each other. I froze. I had zipped the tent fully before going to sleep. I could feel my heart beat a little faster in the quiet. I kept still and listened. The sound came again, slow and soft, just outside the tent. The zipper noise moved slightly, like it was shifting position. Then it stopped. I held my breath, feeling my body tense. The tent fabric did not move. No shadows flickered beyond the walls. My zipper was untouched. I reached over carefully with one hand and touched the zipper pull. It was firmly in place, zipped shut. I waited. The sound returned. This time, I noticed it was coming from a different angle, slightly to my left, near the tent's back corner. The zipper noise pulled slowly, then stopped. My mind raced to find a logical explanation. Could it be an animal? Could a branch or some debris caught on the tent make that sound? I shook my head. The noise was too precise, too deliberate. It was exactly the sound of a zipper being pulled, slow and measured. Nothing else in the woods made that noise. I lay there, eyes wide open in the darkness, feeling the weight of the silence again. The zipper sound repeated, this time closer to the tent's right side. Pulled slowly, then stopped abruptly. I moved slightly to feel the zipper again. It was still closed tight. No wind or anything had disturbed it. I did not want to imagine what it might be. My mind refused to settle on a clear answer. The woods were dark and empty. No other campers were nearby. The closest road was miles away. Who or what could be outside my tent, mimicking the sound of my zipper being pulled? The fear was slow and cold, a steady pressure building in my chest. I tried to stay calm and rational. Maybe it was a raccoon or some other curious animal testing the tent. But animals do not make the sound of a zipper. Maybe a prankster had followed me in from the trailhead. But the area was remote, and I had seen no footprints near the tent. The ground around me was soft, but no marks showed signs of recent movement. I had checked carefully before sleeping. The sound came again. This time it was directly behind the tent. I could hear it pulling the zipper slowly, deliberately. I lay frozen, not daring to move. My eyes stared at the tent fabric, imagining a hand or some tool just outside, trying to open the door. I pictured a shadow pressing in, unseen beyond the canvas. The sound stopped, then a faint scraping noise followed. Something was moving quietly around the tent. I did not want to open the tent or shine my flashlight. That could provoke whoever or whatever was outside. I wanted to stay hidden and still, hoping the night would pass without incident. But the fear grew heavier, and the sounds kept coming. The zipper mimic repeated several more times, moving around the tent in a circle. I could almost track its movement by the sound alone. Eventually, the noises stopped. The night grew quieter again, the tension in my body easing only slightly. I waited until the first light of dawn to open the tent. Outside, the ground was undisturbed. No footprints or signs of intrusion. No tools or objects lay near. The branches and leaves were still. I checked the perimeter carefully but found nothing. I packed my gear slowly, feeling the weight of the night's mystery in my mind. I left the site as soon as I could. On the way back, I kept thinking about what had happened. The only explanation that fit was someone or something had been there, outside my tent, trying to mimic the sound of my zipper being pulled, moving quietly around me. But there was no one there in the morning, no trace left behind. It stayed with me after I got home. I inspected the tent again and again. It was working perfectly, no signs of damage or tampering. I considered calling the park rangers, but there was no proof to give. It felt like the woods had played a trick on me, a strange and unsettling game I did not understand. But the sound was real, the slow pulling of a zipper, close enough to make my blood run cold. Something was there, outside, in the dark, and I was not alone. I remember that day clearly. It was late summer, and my family decided to go camping in a forest not far from our home. We picked a spot near a small lake, surrounded by tall pine trees and thick bushes. The air smelled fresh, damp, and a little like earth after rain. The kind of place that feels peaceful but also full of quiet secrets if you pay attention. We spent the afternoon setting up the tent, unpacking the food, and collecting firewood. My parents and younger sister were busy with the preparations while I wandered a little farther out, curious to explore the woods around us. I was never the type to stay close for long. Something about the quiet drew me deeper between the trees. The forest floor was soft with pine needles, and the occasional bird call made the stillness easier to bear. After a while, I realized I had gone a bit too far and was no longer able to see our campsite through the trees. I was not worried. I told myself I just needed to find my way back, and I would be fine. That was when I noticed it. Another campsite, only a few hundred feet from where I stood. It looked exactly like ours. Same size tent, same shape, same bright blue color. The fire pit was still smoldering, with a faint smell of burnt wood in the air. On the small folding table beside the tent, there were plates with half-eaten food, still warm as if whoever had been there just left moments ago. I moved closer, my heart beating faster. The place was empty, silent except for the soft rustling of the wind through the branches. No sign of anyone around. I stepped carefully, glancing around, but the woods were empty. No footsteps, no broken twigs, no dropped belongings other than what sat on the table. The plates held cold, congealed meat and bread. I recognized some of the food. It was like a mirror of what my family had packed for the trip. The same plastic containers, the same types of snacks. Even the way the fire was arranged matched what we had done at our own campsite. It made no sense. I stayed there for a few minutes, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and unease. It was as if I was looking at a reflection of my own world, but one that was frozen in time or waiting for something. I wanted to call out to see if anyone was there, but something held me back. The silence felt too deep, almost heavy. I turned and walked back toward where I thought my family was, the pine needles crunching softly under my feet. When I returned to our campsite, everything seemed normal. My sister was playing with her toys by the fire, my father was stacking more wood, and my mother was unpacking some supplies near the tent. The late afternoon sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows through the trees. I told myself I must have imagined things. Maybe the other campsite was a trick of the light or some odd coincidence, but I kept the thought to myself. I did not want to worry them or seem strange. We ate dinner together around the fire, the flames crackling and warming the cool night air. The sky darkened, stars emerging one by one through the gaps in the canopy above. After the meal, my mother and sister went into the tent to rest, and I stayed outside, sitting on a log. The forest was alive with nighttime sounds. Distant owls, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the occasional snap of a twig. I felt calm, despite the earlier strange experience. As the night deepened, I lay down in the tent beside my mother and sister. The fabric was cool against my skin, and the smell of pine and campfire mixed with the faint scent of my mother's shampoo. I closed my eyes, listening to the quiet breathing of my family. Then I heard it, my name, a soft, clear voice calling from somewhere outside the tent. It was my mother. I knew it was her because of the way she said it, gentle but urgent. The voice came from the dark trees just beyond our small clearing. I froze. My heart thudded loudly in my chest. The voice came again, calling me deeper into the forest. I wanted to answer, but I knew something was wrong. I looked over at my mother, still asleep beside me, breathing evenly and completely unaware of the voice I had heard. My sister was also fast asleep, curled up next to her. There was no way my mother could be outside calling my name. For several long minutes, I stayed still, listening to the voice fade and then return, faint but unmistakable. Fear settled in slowly, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I reached for my phone, the screen lighting up the inside of the tent, and checked the time. It was well past midnight. I told myself the voice must have been my imagination or some strange trick caused by the quiet and darkness. Yet the sound had been so real, so close. Eventually, I calmed down enough to sleep, though I kept one ear open. The next morning, when the first light filtered through the trees, I told my family about what happened. They listened quietly but looked puzzled. My mother insisted she had not left the tent all night and had no idea what I was talking about. My father said it was probably just a dream or my mind playing tricks. I wanted to believe them, but I could still hear her voice in my head. Before we packed up to leave, I decided to check the area where I had seen the other campsite the day before. We walked through the trees, and when we reached the spot, it was gone. No tent, no fire pit, no table or plates. Just an empty patch of forest floor covered with pine needles and small stones. It was as if the place had never existed. I never found an explanation for what I saw or heard. The whole experience stayed with me, a quiet reminder of how the forest can hide things that do not quite make sense. Since then, I have been careful about wandering off alone, and I never ignore the feeling that some places are not meant to be found. That trip changed the way I look at quiet woods and empty spaces. The world is full of shadows, even when no one is watching. I drove out past the last line of houses and kept going until the road turned to gravel and the radio lost signal. I had checked the forecast twice. Clear sky, no moon, cold but still. I wanted clean stars without glow from towns. I had been planning the spot for a week using maps and old trail photos. A pullout near an abandoned quarry looked perfect. The ground there was wide and flat with loose gravel packed hard by years of trucks. Trees stayed back from the edge, leaving a bowl of sky. I parked with the headlights off and let my eyes adjust. The dark felt heavy at first. Then the stars came out one by one. The air smelled like stone and dust. I could hear insects far away but nothing close. I carried my tripod 10 steps from the car and spread the legs wide so they would not sink. I leveled the head by touch and set the camera. I checked focus using a bright star and then taped the ring so it would not slip. I took test shots and watched the histogram. Everything looked right. I settled into a routine. Step away. Let the exposure run. Come back. Check settings. The silence helped me concentrate. My breathing slowed. I remember feeling small but calm, like I always do under a sky like that. There was no wind. The stars looked sharp. After a few frames, I heard a crunch behind me. It sounded like a boot on gravel. It stopped. I stood still and listened. Nothing followed. I told myself it was a rock settling. I started another exposure. The crunch came again, this time to my left. Same sound. Same weight. Not a scatter or slide, but a single step. I turned my head slowly. I could see the outline of the tripod and the camera against the stars. Beyond that was black. The sound stopped again. I waited through the rest of the exposure, counting seconds in my head. When it finished, I did not move right away. The next sound came from my right, farther out. Traced a curve. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Each step landed at the same distance from the tripod. The spacing was even. The pace was slow. Felt measured. I tried to place the sound on something normal like an animal, but it was wrong. Animals do not walk that clean on loose stone. This was careful. I picked up a small flashlight and aimed it low so it would not ruin my night vision. The beam caught nothing but gravel and dust. The sound stopped again. My heart was beating faster now. I told myself someone else had come out to stargaze or hike. The quarry was not marked private. People wandered out here. I started another exposure because stopping felt worse than continuing. During the first half of it, the crunching resumed. It moved behind the camera now, still tracing a circle. Never closer. Never farther. I focused on breathing through my nose. I kept the light off. I did not want to reveal where I stood. I tried to reason it out. Person could be curious. Maybe they saw my car and wanted to see what I was doing. The distance stayed the same though. It felt like someone testing a boundary. The steps kept the tripod as a center point, not me. That detail stuck with me. Whoever it was cared more about the equipment than about my body. After a while, the steps stopped. The night went still again. I waited a full minute before moving. I checked the camera. The image looked fine on the screen. Stars sharp. Foreground clean. Nothing odd. I decided to take a break and sit on the tailgate. I ate a granola bar and drank water. I kept scanning the dark. Nothing moved. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. My nerves eased enough for me to go back. The crunch came back during the next exposure. This time it was closer to the ground, heavier somehow. I felt the vibration through my boots. I did not turn. I watched the seconds tick down on the camera. The sound passed behind the tripod and continued its loop. I had the strange thought that if I moved the tripod, the sound would adjust to match. That thought made me feel cold. When the exposure ended, the sound stopped. I shut the camera off and stood there, listening hard. Nothing answered me. I decided to pack up. The sky would be there another night. I folded the tripod and walked back to the car. The crunching did not follow. I drove away with the lights on and did not look back. At home the next day, I loaded the files. I zoomed in and checked focus. Everything looked normal until I reached one frame from the middle of the session. In that image, the stars were blocked in a tall, narrow shape near the tripod. It rose straight up, darker than the sky, with soft edges at the top. The rest of the frame showed clean stars. The shape stood exactly where the circle of steps would have crossed the field of view. I checked the metadata. Long exposure. No flash. I looked at the sequence before and after. The shape was only in that one frame. My first thought was a tree, but there were no trees that close. I remembered the darkness and the way I had kept the light low. The explanation came slowly as I replayed the night. During that exposure, the steps had slowed. The sound had lingered in one spot for several seconds before moving on. In a long exposure, a person who stands still will block stars without appearing sharp. They become a shadow, not a figure. If they move after, the camera will not record them as a blur. Just a cut in the sky. The distance stayed constant because the person stayed at the edge of the frame, testing angles, staying unseen. The circle was about the tripod because the camera mattered. Someone could have been watching me, waiting to see if I would leave it unattended. The quarry had been used for dumping and theft before. I found old posts online later about stolen equipment from that area. The tall shape matched a human height. The width matched shoulders turned sideways. The perfect circle of steps matched someone keeping a safe distance in the dark. The pause matched someone standing still to see if I would react. I did not capture something that appeared from nowhere. I captured someone who knew how long exposures work, or someone who learned by accident while trying to stay hidden. The fear I felt did not come from the photo. It came from knowing that while I was alone under the stars, someone else had been close enough to circle my gear in silence, choosing not to be seen, choosing when to stand still, and choosing when to let me go. I was through hiking alone to clear my head after leaving a job that had started to feel like a closed room. I had planned this route for months. It followed a long ridge with steady climbs and long drops into forested valleys. The trail was old and lightly used this time of year. Late autumn had already stripped most leaves from the trees. The ground was loud underfoot and the air carried every small sound. I liked that at first because it made me feel alert and present. That day had been longer than I planned. A steep descent chewed up my knees and slowed me down. Clouds moved in during the afternoon and the light faded early. I passed an old sign nailed to a tree that marked a shelter that no longer stood. Only the name remained carved deep into the wood. I reached the spot just before dark. All that was left was a low stone foundation half filled with dirt and leaves. The place felt used but abandoned. It was flat and close to water, so I decided to camp nearby. I set my tent a short distance downhill from the foundation where the ground was softer. The slope above me rose at a shallow angle covered with loose rocks and pine needles. I noticed that some stones near the foundation were rounded and smooth from years of boots and weather. I ate quickly and crawled into my sleeping bag as the temperature dropped. The forest went still in the way it does when the light fully leaves. The first rock rolled about an hour after dark. It clicked once, then slid a few feet before stopping. It was close enough to make me tense, but not close enough to hit the tent. I told myself it was normal. Animals moved at night. The slope was loose. I lay still and listened. Another rock rolled 10 minutes later. This one traveled farther. It made a low scraping sound and stopped just past the first one. The timing stood out. It did not feel random. I checked my watch without turning on my headlamp. The seconds passed clean and slow. My breathing stayed steady. The third rock came after another similar gap. It followed the same path and stopped in line with the others. I sat up inside the tent and listened harder. No footsteps, no heavy movement, just the forest settling and the wind high in the trees. I waited. My shoulders stayed tight. Over the next few hours, the pattern continued. A rock would move every 10 to 15 minutes, always from uphill, always controlled. None came fast, none bounced wildly. Each stopped short of the tent but closer than the last. I could track the line by sound alone. My headlamp stayed off because light would make me visible. I did not want to announce myself. I considered packing up and moving, but the slope and darkness made that risky. I also did not want to climb toward whatever was above me. I stayed put and listened. At some point, the rolling stopped. The silence after felt heavier than the sound had been. I did not sleep. I stayed awake until the cold eased and the first gray light crept through the trees. When morning came, I waited longer than usual before opening the tent. The forest looked ordinary. No movement. No fresh tracks that I could see from inside. I stepped out slowly and looked uphill. The rocks were not scattered. They were stacked into a neat line. Each one rested against the next in a straight row that pointed directly toward the foundation. The stones were chosen for size and shape. None were random. Someone had handled them with care. The line ended at the edge of the old shelter base. I walked up carefully and looked around. The ground near the foundation showed clear boot prints. They were not mine. They came from uphill and circled the foundation more than once. The soil was pressed flat where someone had stood for a long time. I found more signs then. A crushed patch of leaves behind a tree. A few cigarette butts hidden under a rock. A small pile of food wrappers tucked into a crack in the foundation stones. Someone had been staying there. The explanation came together slowly and fully. A person was living near the shelter remains. Maybe seasonal. Maybe hiding. They heard me arrive and watched. The rock rolling was deliberate. It was a test and a warning. Not meant to injure. Meant to measure my reaction and mark the space. The line pointed uphill because that was their ground. They wanted me to know that without showing themselves. I broke camp fast but carefully. I did not touch the rocks. I did not approach the foundation again. I left the site exactly as I found it. As I hiked away, I scanned the trees and the slope behind me. I never saw anyone, but I felt watched until the trail bent and dropped away. Later that day, I reached a maintained section of trail with fresh signs and a register. I wrote a detailed note about the shelter site and what I found. I included the location and the signs of long-term use. I did not accuse anyone of a crime. I stated facts only. When I reached the next town, I reported it to the local trail office. They took it seriously and thanked me. I finished my hike weeks later, but that night stayed with me. It was not fear of the dark or the woods. It was the calm precision of the act. Someone was there. Someone chose control over chaos. They made sure I understood the message and left room for me to leave. I did. I needed space from people more than comfort. Work had piled up. Family stress sat heavy. I chose a legal dispersed site far from marked campgrounds, a place where the forest road thinned and cell service died. I parked near a bend where trees crowded close, walked my permit in my pocket, and set my tent where the ground sloped enough to drain. I kept things simple. One tent, one stove, food sealed and hung. I wanted quiet that stayed quiet. The day faded slow. Pine needles softened every step. The air smelled wet even though it had not rained. I cooked early and cleaned until my hands were numb from cold water. When dark came, it came full. No nearby camps. No engines. No wind worth naming. I locked the car out of habit and checked the hood because I had driven a long climb. It was cool enough to rest my palm without pulling back. I slept early but light. Sometime after midnight, I woke without a sound pulling me up. My eyes opened and the forest felt awake. I stayed still, listening. The night pressed close. Then I saw it between the trees. A headlamp moved where the trail would have been if there was a trail. The light stayed chest high and steady. It slid from trunk to trunk without dipping. What struck me first was what it did not do. No beam cut the ground. No sweep across branches. The glow stayed tight and level, like a covered lamp pointed straight ahead. I waited for noise, leaves, twigs, breathing. Nothing came. The light paused, then drifted again. The distance felt close enough to hear steps if there were any. I eased my head toward the tent door seam. The zipper did not move. I watched through fabric. The light passed behind a thick cedar and vanished. It returned seconds later farther right. The pace stayed even. Whoever carried it moved like they knew the ground by memory. I told myself there were reasons. Hunters move at night. Rangers patrol quietly. People hike with lamps tilted wrong. My chest did not listen. I stayed still and counted breaths. The light crossed behind my car and cut off, as if switched off or blocked by the body. I waited for it to come back. It did not. The forest returned to a flat dark that felt louder than sound. Sleep came in short pieces. Every time I shifted, the tent fabric rasped too bright. I did not check the car again. I stayed until gray crept through the trees and birds began their sharp work. Morning felt earned. I packed slow. The air held that clean smell that comes after cold. When I stepped to the car, the hood caught my eye first. There were handprints smeared across the paint. Not crisp, dragged. The kind left by wet gloves or dirty palms. They spread wider than my own hands. The marks ran from the edge toward the center, as if someone leaned in and pushed off. There were no prints on the windshield. None on the doors. Just the hood. I stood there longer than I should have, measuring with my eyes. I set my palm down beside one mark. Mine looked smaller. The smears showed fabric texture, not skin. I walked the ground. The soil was soft under needles. It would hold tracks if weight pressed hard. Near the front of the car I found shallow scuffs, not clear steps. They angled like someone standing close without shifting much. No trail led away. The ground beyond was harder, packed by old tires and roots. Could hide light steps. I checked the engine bay. Everything was intact. No wires pulled. No smell of fuel. The hood latch was untouched. The fear thinned into something colder and sharper. Someone had come close on purpose. The headlamp staying chest high made sense now. A lamp mounted on a strap, kept level to avoid giving position away. The beam not hitting the ground fit a hood or hand cupped over it to keep light tight. No sound fit slow movement on needles, careful weight, boots with soft soles. Hunters do this. So do people who do not want to be noticed. The handprints made sense too. The night had been damp. Gloves pick up moisture and grit fast. Leaning on a hood to feel warmth from an engine is common. A car that arrived before dark tells a story. Someone checking if it was safe, if the owner was nearby, if the engine was warm enough to mean recent movement. Wide prints do not mean big hands. Gloves spread. Smears widen when someone pushes away. I did not feel better. I felt clear. This was not a thing that floats or vanishes. It was a person who chose distance and quiet. The same reason I was there. That overlap felt worse. I loaded the car and drove out slow, scanning mirrors. No one followed. The forest closed behind me like it always does. At home, I washed the hood. The smears lifted easy. Paint shone. The marks left nothing permanent. The night did. I stopped camping alone after that. Not from fear of the dark, but from respect for it. Remote places attract people who want to move unseen. Most want to be left alone. Some do not care who else is there. I had needed space from people. I found proof that space does not mean empty. My name is Evan R. I went into the backcountry with my older brother because he told me the trail was dead and empty. He had been hiking longer than I had been alive. I trusted his sense of places. He knew which roads ended in nothing and which trailheads stayed quiet even on weekends. He said this one had been forgotten. The map showed a thin line cutting through national forest with no camps marked past the first mile. We parked where the pavement broke into gravel and then into dirt. No other vehicles were there. The air smelled clean when we stepped out, cold pine and dust. Nothing felt wrong at first. We hiked until late afternoon. The trail narrowed and then faded into packed dirt with old boot prints pressed deep and hardened by time. The forest grew thicker and darker. Fallen trees lay where they had dropped years ago. No fresh cuts. No new signs. We set camp near a dry creek bed where the ground was flat and clear. My brother chose the spot fast, like he had done this many times before. I followed and did what I was told without question. The silence felt heavy but not threatening. Birds moved above us. Wind passed through branches. Everything seemed normal. That night, the temperature dropped hard. The fire burned low and steady. I remember the smell starting after dark. It was not smoke. It was not rot from leaves. It smelled like wet fur mixed with old meat that had been left out too long. Came in waves and then faded. I thought it might be something dead upstream. I checked my boots. Nothing was on them. The smell came back stronger around midnight and settled into the air. Clung to the back of my throat. I stayed awake longer than I wanted. I heard nothing moving close. No steps. No snapping wood. Just the smell and the quiet. In the morning, everything looked normal again. The light made the forest seem harmless. I walked to the edge of camp and noticed the cooler was not where we left it. It had been moved about 10 feet closer to the trees. The lid was still shut. No scratches. No bite marks. The handles were clean. It looked like someone had picked it up and set it down. I stood there staring at it longer than I should have. My brother looked at it too. He did not react the way I expected. He checked the ground around it. He studied the dirt and leaves. He wiped his hands on his pants and went back to packing food without any sign of panic. I told myself there was a simple reason. Maybe it slid. Maybe we misremembered the spot. I tried to accept that. The second day passed slow. The forest felt thicker. The trail beyond camp faded even more until it barely existed. We did not see fresh tracks. No scat. No feathers. No signs of life close by. The smell did not return during the day. That made it worse in my head. It felt like waiting for something that had already passed through once. By late evening, the sky clouded over. The air felt heavy and damp. The fire did not crack the same way. I felt watched without any clear source. I kept scanning the trees and finding nothing. That night, the smell came back stronger than before. It wrapped around the camp like fog. My eyes watered. My stomach turned. I covered my face with my sleeve and tried to breathe through my mouth. Sometime after midnight, a sound came from far away. It was not loud. It did not echo. It sounded strained, like lungs pushing past their limits. It rose and fell unevenly and then stopped. It was not close enough to locate. Came again a few minutes later, weaker this time, and then nothing. I did not sleep after that. At sunrise, my brother packed everything fast. He did not check the map. He did not sit. He moved with focus and tension in his shoulders. I followed and did not ask questions. We left food behind to lighten the load. We did not look back. The hike out felt longer. Every sound felt sharp. When we reached the truck, my legs shook with relief. We drove for a long time before stopping. Only then did my brother finally explain. He had seen signs I missed. The cooler was not dragged. It had been lifted and set down, which meant something strong with careful movement. Bears do that when testing unfamiliar objects. The smell came from a carcass nearby, likely a deer or elk that had died from injury or sickness. Wet fur and old meat meant it was recent and not fully consumed. Predators do not leave those alone for long. The scream was not a call. It was an injured animal in distress, likely pushed past pain by infection or internal damage. Strained breathing changes the sound. That kind of animal attracts everything else in the area. He said the lack of tracks meant the ground was too hard to hold prints, not that nothing was there. He said bears move quiet when they want to. He said the trail was dead because people stopped going there after repeated reports of aggressive wildlife behavior tied to sick animals and poor food conditions. He knew this and still brought me because he believed we could pass through before trouble found us. When the cooler moved and the smell returned, he knew we were no longer early. We never went back. A month later, a ranger report mentioned a bear euthanized near that creek after charging hikers. It had a stomach full of rotten meat and bone fragments. The timing matched our trip. The explanation settled everything in my mind. Nothing supernatural happened. We walked into a chain of natural events that did not care about us. The fear came from being close to something real, injured, hungry, and unpredictable. That knowledge still sits with me. When I smell wet fur after rain, my chest tightens and I remember how quiet the forest can be right before it decides what belongs there and what does not. I went alone to prove I could. I had just lost my job, and the days after that felt soft and useless. I kept waking late and staring at walls. I needed to do something that felt firm. Something that did not care if I failed an interview or did not answer emails. I chose a short solo camp in a patch of public land a few hours from where I lived. I told myself it was simple. One night, walk in, sleep, walk out. I packed light and drove out before noon. The road narrowed and the trees closed in. There were no signs once I left the highway. I parked near a bend where the ground was bare from other tires. I locked the car and started walking with my pack. The trail was faint but easy enough to follow. I remember thinking how quiet it was without music or traffic. Every sound felt sharp. Wind in leaves, my boots on dirt, my breath. I found a clearing after about an hour. It sat just off the trail and felt hidden. The ground was flat and mostly clear. The grass was pressed down in places like someone had slept there recently. There was no fire pit. That stood out. People usually leave some sign of a fire. Stones. This place had none. Just the pressed grass and a few broken twigs. I told myself maybe someone passed through and did not stay long. I set up my tent and took my time. I wanted the motions to feel steady. I cooked a simple meal and ate before dark. The sky turned gray and then black. I sat for a while listening. I felt proud of myself in a quiet way. No phone. No one watching. Just me doing a thing I chose. I went into the tent early. I lay on my back and stared at the fabric. The forest settled. Small sounds moved around me. I slept in short pieces and woke often. Each time I told myself this was normal. New place. Alone. The night always feels louder when you have no one to share it with. Sometime near dawn I woke to breathing. It was slow and steady. At first I thought it was mine echoing in the tent. I focused on it and realized it was coming from outside. It was close. Too close. Right at the side of the tent near my head. What froze me was the timing. The sound matched me. Each breath in. Each breath out. The same length. The same pause. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence. Then I changed my breathing. I took a short breath. The sound outside shortened too. I let out a longer one. It did the same. My chest tightened. I stopped breathing. I held it until my lungs burned. The sound outside stopped at the exact same time. The silence felt thick. I let out a small breath by mistake. The sound came back with it. I lay there for a long time. My body felt heavy and light at once. My hands tingled. I did not move. I did not reach for anything. I did not think about yelling. I knew no one was near enough to hear. The breathing stayed slow and calm. It did not rush. It did not change. It felt practiced, like someone trying very hard to be still and quiet. When the light started to seep through the tent fabric, the sound faded. It did not stop all at once. It stretched out and then ended. I waited longer. Birds began to move. The forest woke up like it always does. Normal sounds returned. I forced myself to move. I grabbed my knife and unzipped the tent. The clearing looked the same at first. Pale light, trees standing still. Then I saw the ground. Right beside the tent where my head had been was an oval pressed flat into the grass and dirt. It was clean and smooth. No footprints leading to it. No marks showing how it formed. Just an impression like a body had been lying there for hours. It was the length of a person and wide at the shoulders. The grass inside it was damp and bent. I stepped back and looked around. Still no tracks. The ground was soft enough to show them. I walked a slow circle. Nothing. The oval sat alone like it had been placed there. I packed as fast as I could without running. My hands shook, but I made myself be careful. I did not want to rip anything or leave gear behind. I shouldered my pack and walked back the way I came. I did not look over my shoulder. When I reached my car, I felt sick with relief. I drove straight home. I did not stop. In the days after, I tried to explain it away. I told myself it was an animal. But animals do not match breathing. I told myself it was a person playing a joke. That made less sense. Someone would have left tracks. Someone would have made noise moving away. Someone would have needed to know I was there and choose to lie inches from my head and copy my breath without touching the tent. I went back online and searched the area. I found posts about that stretch of land. People talked about finding used camps with no fire pits, about pressed grass and no prints, about feeling watched near dawn. One post mentioned breathing, but no one explained it. The explanation that finally settled in me was simple and worse than anything else. Someone lives out there. Someone who moves without leaving signs. Someone who watches people camp and waits. Someone who practices staying still and quiet and close. Someone who likes to see if they can be noticed. I stopped camping alone after that. I found another job a month later. Life filled back in. But sometimes when I wake early and the room is quiet, I pay attention to my breathing. I make sure it is only mine. I was 19 and thought I knew my limits. I had just finished my first year of college and wanted to feel older than I was. 3 friends and I planned a weekend to fish and drink. Nothing serious, just a break before summer jobs started. We picked a spot we found on a printed map, a place that looked quiet and far from roads. The plan was simple: hike in, camp near the water, fish during the day, drink at night, hike out on Sunday. We started late on Friday. The trail was clear at first, then thinned as we moved deeper. The woods changed slowly. Trees grew shorter and bent. The ground stayed wet even where the sun hit it. We joked about it and kept walking. We missed the turn that would have led to the small lake we aimed for. None of us noticed until hours later, when the land flattened and the air grew heavy. By then it was evening. We were tired and did not want to backtrack. We reached a wide marsh with shallow water and tall grass. It stretched farther than it looked. The smell hit me first. It was a mix of rot and metal, like wet leaves and old blood. The ground near the edge felt firm enough, so we decided to camp there. We told ourselves it was just for one night. We set up the tents on a strip of higher ground near the water. Mosquitoes were thick and aggressive. The marsh made constant soft sounds. Frogs, insects, water moving through grass. It never fully went quiet. We fished before dark. The water was murky, almost black in places. I caught nothing. None of us did. We blamed the spot and started drinking. As night came down, the temperature dropped fast. Fog rose from the marsh and hung low. Our headlamps showed only a few feet ahead. The light bounced off the mist and made everything look closer than it was. We ate canned food and put the rest in a bag, hung from a tree branch. We checked it twice. No one wanted animals near the tents. I crawled into my sleeping bag early. I was buzzed and exhausted. The sounds of the marsh felt louder once I lay still. Around midnight, I woke up fully alert. I did not know why at first. Then I heard it, a slow splash coming from the shallow water. It was not random. It was steady. Splash, pause, splash. Each one sounded heavy, like something placing weight into the water and lifting it out again. I lay still and listened. Wind can make water move, but this was different. The sound stayed in the same spot. It did not drift or fade. It did not speed up. Felt measured. I checked my watch. It had been doing this for at least 10 minutes. My mind searched for answers. A deer, a large bird, someone sleepwalking, but the sound never came closer or farther. It stayed at a fixed distance, maybe 20 feet from the edge of our camp. The fog made it impossible to see. I forced myself to stay in the bag. I told myself it was nothing worth getting up for. The splashing went on for hours. Sometimes it stopped for a minute, then started again in the same rhythm. My heart stayed tight the whole time. I barely slept. When the sound finally stopped, the silence felt wrong, like pressure on my ears. Morning came gray and cold. The fog lifted slowly. My body felt stiff and sore. We gathered near the water to check our lines. That was when we noticed something was wrong. Every fishing line we had left in the water was ruined. Lines were tangled together in thick knots. Some were snapped clean. Hooks were bent. One reel was pulled loose from the rod and lay half submerged in the mud. Our food bag was untouched. No claw marks. No teeth marks. No sign of animals near camp. We checked the ground around the water. The mud should have shown tracks. There were none. Just smooth, disturbed water and flattened grass, as if something moved through without pressing down. The smell was stronger in daylight. Rot and iron mixed with stagnant water. I felt sick standing there. We searched for logical answers. Otters, beavers, drunk mistakes, but nothing fit. Animals would have gone for food. People would have left prints. Wind would not tangle lines that badly. Then I noticed the cuts. Some lines were not snapped from tension. They looked sliced, clean and straight. The knots were tight in ways that did not make sense for water movement. It looked like hands had worked them, slowly, carefully, in the dark. We packed fast. No one joked anymore. The hike out felt longer than it should have. The marsh stayed behind us, but the smell lingered in my nose the whole way back. We found the correct trail later that afternoon. The relief felt thin and delayed. Years passed. I learned about illegal trapping areas, about people who live far from roads, about what stagnant marsh water does to metal and skin. I read about how some hunters mess with camps to scare others away. I thought about someone standing in the fog, knee-deep in water, testing our lines again and again, making sure we noticed. That explanation fits best. It explains the steady splashing. It explains the untouched food. It explains the lack of tracks. Someone knew how to move through that marsh without leaving signs. Someone wanted us gone. I still do not fish anymore. Not because of fear of the dark or the woods, but because I learned how exposed you are near water. How quiet people can be. How patience can feel like something watching you. That weekend taught me that real danger does not rush. It waits, works slowly, and leaves you with proof in the morning. I went camping because my divorce finalized that week and I did not want to sit in my empty apartment. The place still smelled like her shampoo even though all her stuff was gone. Every room felt louder without another person moving through it. I kept waking up on the couch with the television still on and my phone in my hand. I needed somewhere else to put my head for a night. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that did not remind me of shared routines and small arguments that added up over years. I chose a site far off the main road. It was not an official campground. Just a clearing marked on an old map I found online. The drive took longer than expected. The road turned to gravel and then to dirt. Trees leaned closer as I went, their branches brushing the sides of my car. By the time I parked, it was late afternoon. No other vehicles. No signs. Just a flat patch near a dry creek bed and a line of woods behind it. Setting up the tent gave my hands something to do. The ground was hard and packed. I had to lean my weight into the stakes. The air smelled like dust and pine sap. Birds moved through the trees but did not come close. I noticed that the woods felt different than places I had camped before. Not loud, not silent, just off. Sounds seemed delayed, like they took a second too long to reach me. When the sun dropped behind the trees, the temperature fell fast. I ate a simple meal and sat by a small fire until the light faded. Shadows thickened between the trunks. The woods did not fill with noise like I expected. No chorus of insects, no distant calls. Felt like everything had paused. I told myself it was just an unfamiliar place and my head was not right. Stress does that. So does lack of sleep. I crawled into the tent early. The fabric smelled new and stiff. I lay on my back and listened. Wind moved the trees now and then. Leaves brushed together. My thoughts kept circling the same things. Papers signed. A last look back at the apartment door. The feeling that I had failed at something I promised would last. My body felt tired, but my mind would not slow down. Around 1:40 a.m., I woke up because the ground shifted slightly under me. At first I thought it was wind. Then I felt it again. Pressure. A heavy step close to the tent. Not right against it, but near enough that the dirt compressed and sent a dull vibration through the floor. I held my breath without meaning to. Another step followed, wider this time, like something circling. There were no animal sounds. No snorting. No breathing. Just weight. Each step landed and paused. A few seconds of stillness. Then another step. It moved slow and deliberate. I could feel where it stopped, as if it was listening. The pattern stayed wide, never brushing the tent wall. My heart beat so hard it made my ears ring. I stayed still and counted breaths to keep from panicking. I tried to tell myself it was a deer or a cow from a nearby ranch. But deer make noise. They scrape and snort. This did neither. The steps continued for what felt like a long time. Minutes stretched. At one point, the weight stopped on the far side and did not move. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the dark fabric inches from my face. I did not reach for my light. I did not want to give away my position, even though the thought made no sense. Eventually, the pressure eased. The steps moved away toward the trees. I did not hear anything after that. No retreat, just absence. I did not sleep much after. My body stayed tight, ready to react. Dawn came slow. The sky lightened to gray, then pale blue. When birds finally started calling, the sound felt like relief. I stepped out of the tent and stretched stiff muscles. The campsite looked normal. No damage. No tracks near the tent. I walked the perimeter, scanning the ground. That was when I saw the prints. Boot prints. My boots. Leading away from camp toward the creek bed. Clear impressions in the dirt, spaced like a normal walking pace. They went about 50 yards before fading where the ground turned rocky. I stood there for a long time trying to make sense of it. I did not remember leaving the tent. I did not remember putting on my boots. I checked my feet. Dirt clung to the soles and sides. The laces were tied, but loose in the way I usually leave them. I felt cold as the realization settled. I sat on a rock and went back through the night in my head. The stress of the week, the lack of sleep, the drinks I had on the drive up, more than I should have had. I remembered my father talking about sleepwalking when I was a kid, how I once stood in the hallway and stared at the wall for minutes without responding. I had not thought about that in years. The explanation fit even if I did not like it. I must have gotten up, put on my boots, and walked out into the dark. The heavy steps around the tent were my own feet when I returned. The pauses were me standing still, disoriented, listening to sounds my waking mind invented later. There were no animal tracks because there was no animal. Just me moving through the night without awareness. I packed up slowly after that. Every sound felt sharper. I kept looking at the ground, half expecting more prints. Driving back, the road seemed shorter, familiar. By the time I reached pavement, the sun was high and ordinary life crept back in. I did not feel relief. I felt unsettled in a different way. The idea that I could leave my shelter without knowing scared me more than anything outside the tent. The woods did not do anything to me. They just held space while I unraveled on my own. I went home, scheduled a doctor appointment, and stopped drinking for a while. I have not camped alone since. Not because of what walked around my tent, but because of what walked away from it without me knowing.